I gotta say, there is something truly demented about debating whether invading a country to annex territory and bombing it is pro-war. Let's talk about the crazy debate between Jackson Hinkle and Michael Tracey. So we've had Michael Tracey on the show before. Michael Tracey is a commentator who is pretty against sending aid to Ukraine. He's not pro-Russia necessarily, but he is against sending aid to Ukraine. He's very much like an isolationist. You can even hear it in his rhetoric when he talks about World War II and trying to restrict us from really any involvement in any foreign wars, period. He's genuinely, I would say, somebody who's very anti-interventionist and extremely isolationist in nature. Now, on the other end of this debate is Jackson Hinkle. This is somebody who is pro-war. He is for Russia invading Ukraine. He said they weren't going to invade Ukraine in the first place, right? He said that it was all fear-mongering and nonsense. But then when the Russians did invade Ukraine, he was all for it. So kind of like a, you know, oh, that's never going to happen. Oh, that's not real. Oh, it's real? Well, then I'm 100% for it. Like the goalpost keeps shifting. He just basically repeated what the Russian government was saying in the lead up to the war, that it wasn't going to happen. And then when the war did happen, they justified it. So he moved his position from being against the idea of it ever happening to immediately, I'm in favor of the invasion. Invasion's good. Woohoo, yay. Right? Almost immediately afterwards. Because he has decided that, hey, look at me. I'm not a sheeple. I'm against the establishment. And I'm going to show how against the establishment I am by, instead of being in favor of the American establishment, I'm just going to be in favor of another country's establishment, the Russian establishment. So these guys sat down to have a debate about this conference, this event, this rally that's happening over the weekend. It's going to be on the 19th, February 19th in DC, which is just down the street from me. I only live 30 minutes away from where this is going to be happening. It's going to have a whole host of voices. Jimmy Dore, Max Blumenthal, Kim Iverson. You guys might know Kim Iverson as being the person who blamed the Lebanese port explosion on the Mossad and the CIA with zero evidence, saying that they did it to get at the Chinese. She didn't have any evidence for it, besides the fact that one report at one time said Chinese fireworks could have been part of the explosion, and that was meant to pin it on China somehow. Whatever. She's a conspiracy theorist. That's just one of her many conspiracy theories. And a bunch of other people from Gray Zone, people from all over, Garland Nixon, Jill Stein of the Green Party. It's generally people on the political fringes. And Cynthia McKinney, who I believe she has pinned 9/11 on the Jews, or I think it was Israel. Either way, not good, considering Israel didn't do 9/11, unless you're, again, a conspiracy theorist. Jimmy Dore, who, along with most of the people on here, believed that the American government organized a coup in Ukraine, and when he was confronted with the fact that that wasn't true and he didn't have any evidence, he ran away. This happened on the Adam and Sid show. So just say, this is like DashCon 2023, for anybody knows that internet history. This is a convention I have really little interest of going to. And I've had, personally, I don't know if I should go or not, because on one hand, might be fun to record it and film there and like interact with people that disagree with me. But on the other hand, this is a lot of speakers, right? And I don't know if I want to listen to how many hours of these guys just going on and on and on and on the same points over and over and over again. But the thing that gets me about this event is that this is advertised because the Libertarian Party is taking part of this. And I know a lot of libertarians personally, and I've seen them on social media, angry about this event. And I'll explain why in a second. They got the People's Party, you got the Mises Caucus, which is a part of the Libertarian Party that's considered more right-wing, all coming together, all these different groups. You can see all the groups at the bottom here. Center for Political Innovation, that is Caleb Maupin's political action group. I think it's his think tank. Caleb Maupin, for those of you who don't know, is the disgraced communist leader in the United States who got exposed recently for pushing spanking on his communist recruits, as in he wanted to talk to them about his sexual spanking fantasies. He's, you know, the Stalin of the paddle, I guess we could call him. Burger King. Spanky Tanky is the word, is the nickname many people have given him. They have come together to make this anti-war rally. That's the pitch. And that no matter how much disagreements, all of these different people who all seem to be on the political fringes, but the one thing that unites them is they're all against the war. It's an anti-war rally in Washington, D.C. There's just one problem, is that a lot of the people who are speaking here, not only are there a lot of conspiracy theorists and people who have lied about the war and have said disgusting things. I guess we could start with the disgusting things people, but I want to get to a wider point. For example, Scott Ritter was actually invited to speak at the rally until a few days ago, after like a good month of backlash at the fact that Scott Ritter, who's a former weapons inspector, disgraced weapons inspector, is a convicted pedophile. As in, he tried to go out and have sexually explicit conversations with children, and he got caught after trying to send his schlong to children, or police officers personating children on the internet, and they caught him. And this wasn't a one-time thing. This was a two-time thing that he got slammed on this issue. So this is somebody who is really gross. And you can go online and you can see the type of messages he sent. He knew that these were young people. He knew that they were minors, and he still wanted to engage with them sexually. Now, obviously, this event got a lot of heat for inviting somebody who is a convicted, attempted child predator to speak at an event and build a following, which he could then use to then go prey upon more children. There's a reason why we don't want child molesters to be top tier level celebrities where everybody is like giving them attention. Because the thing is with a lot of child molesters is they don't stop. It's not like, oh, a one-time thing, a two-time thing. They keep going out and abusing children. And so giving this guy who is shown, by the way, there's his mugshot, right? This isn't hearsay. He's convicted. It's over. He was convicted, sentenced, the whole shebang. Giving this guy an audience to speak to so he can go out and abuse more children or attempt to go out and touch children is not a smart idea. And a lot of the people on here are also who are invited on this event are the same people who talk about Jeffrey Epstein. Oh, we really got to get to Jeffrey Epstein. And look, I hate Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, I cry no tears over his death. But you can't be talking about Pizzagate or Jeffrey Epstein or any of the deep elite globalist cabal and how they're all friends with pedophiles or they're all pedophiles and it's all disgusting, and then be willing to have a pedophile stand shoulder to shoulder with you and garner an audience, which they could then go use to abuse children. And I've thought about for a while making a video about Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter has me blocked because anytime I see him in my timeline, I remind him of the fact that he is convicted on this, and I think people should know about this before they listen to anything Scott Ritter has to say. I just think it's a little hypocritical to see all these anti-establishment guys go so hard against the elite globalist pedophile cabal, but then so willing to give a pedophile a platform, somebody who went out and tried to molest children. So that's the first thing. So when it comes to disgustingness, and like there's a bunch of people on this that are disgusting. Jackson Hinkle, I know, is a piece of shit, because I remember having a conversation with him in a Twitter space, which similar to the Twitter space, just had a conversation with Michael Tracey. And once I asked him about some groups that had given him money, he then tried to use my mother's heroin addiction to dunk on me. This whole event is just full of like horrible, horrible people, right? And so that first part of the disgustingness of it, or the amount of really gross people involved, you can put that to the side. That doesn't need to matter as much as my next point. And my next point is this. A lot of the people that are invited to this anti-war rally, like Scott Ritter, are not anti-war. For example, I don't claim to be anti-war. Never did. There are rabid dogs out there, and we need Atticus Finch to shoot them. I do, however, object to the senselessness of shooting of healthy dogs. Ukraine is a rabid dog. Russia is Atticus Finch. Thus ends my lesson. This isn't just a pro-war message. This is genocidal language. Russia is an affected, rabid dog, and Russia needs to put him down. That is genocidal language. And I don't think any international rights scholar, human rights scholar, or anybody who studied genocide would look at this and not think this is dehumanization of a gross level. Thankfully, the event booted Scott Ritter, in part because of this message, of the fact that he's pro-war and he's always been pro-war, and in part because he's a convicted child predator, which, you know, I think probably makes you want to dissociate with somebody pretty quickly once you learn that information. But that's not it. Because the thing is, Scott Ritter is also somebody who just generally has been wrong every step of the way. Scott Ritter said that the invasion wasn't going to happen. Then when it did, he said it was going to be over quickly. And then when it wasn't, he said that Russia was still going to win decisively. And then when they did, like, he just kept moving the goalpost constantly. Not only did he keep moving the goalpost constantly, but anytime Russia committed a war crime, he was there to cover it up. Here's an example of it. The Ukrainian National Police committed numerous crimes against humanity in Bucha. Biden, in seeking to shift the blame for Bucha murderers onto Russia, is guilty of aiding and abetting these crimes. Congratulations, America. We've created yet another presidential war criminal. Okay, number one, this isn't a war crime for Biden to talk about what happened to Bucha and point the finger at Russia. That's not a war crime, okay? You would think somebody who used to be a UN's weapon inspector before he was disgraced because he likes to diddle children would, you know, think about what the legal implications of what he's saying is. Okay, first thing. Second thing, the Russian military did those crimes in Bucha. And people at the time, like Jackson Hinkle, denied it. But the evidence since then has made it so they shut up about it and they don't talk about it anymore. And the reason why is there's satellite photographs of the bodies while Russia occupied the territory laid out in the street. There is video evidence of Russian soldiers going behind Ukrainian soldiers and not Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian civilians, and shooting them in the back. This is publicly available footage from this area, from the Russian advance on Kiev. We have audio clips of Russians calling home to their families, admitting to these war crimes, talking about we would find Ukrainian civilians. They would be so scared that we'd tell the Ukrainians where we were after getting ambushed and hurt so badly that we would kill them so that they don't know. They don't know about it. So Scott Ritter and Jackson are two people who continue to deny Bucha, but they kind of shut up about it more now because the evidence has stacked so high against them that if they were to talk to anybody who knows what they're talking about Bucha, they would be unable to defend their positions. And so Jackson Hinkle, similarly to Scott Ritter, claims to be anti-war while supporting the Russian invasion. And that's where we get to this debate, and we finally get out of the intro section of this. For example, this is where it started with between Michael Tracey and Jackson Hinkle. Michael Tracey tweets out, "While I like a number of the people associated with the Rage Against War rally, it has to be said the fact that the organizers have chosen to feature participants who are avowedly not anti-war, but rather explicitly pro-war, undermines the entire stated purpose of the event. The truth is that a significant faction of the speakers, who aren't just incidentally taking part, but have been elevated into the promotional material and cast as public faces of the cause, are unambiguous, crystal clear supporters of the Russian war effort. It's not disputable. The event is officially billed as an anti-war rally, but a glaringly obvious portion of the speakers are declared outright partisans of the Russian state and its war aims. There is no coherent way to reconcile their stated position with any concept of anti-war advocacy. It's really straightforward. If someone explicitly declares themselves to be a supporter of a belligerent party war in a war effort, they are not espousing an anti-war position. Rather the opposite. This is an inherent contradiction that casts doubt on the very premise of the event. I'm not naming names because I'm not interested in overly personalizing this or ginning up drama. That's not why I'm commenting. I'm commenting because the organizers have perversely legitimized a central attack line used against those espousing a genuine anti-war view. The attack line is as follows. You're saying this because you support Putin or you support Russia. Now they're saying that they've legitimized it, but it is also true that that a significant portion of the people and organizations involved in trying to stop aid to Ukraine that would help them liberate their country are people who support the Russian state or they're goons for the Russian state. They get paid by RT, they get paid by Russian state media, or they get paid by lobby groups that work on their behalf, right? So or they work completely independently of the Russian state, but they regurgitate their propaganda uncritically, even though many of them probably know that a lot of the things they're saying are false. Or if they don't, that just makes them gullible, and that just makes them a useful idiot for the Russian state. A lot of the people involved in this event are like that. In fact, the person who ended up replacing Scott Ritter, this person, Cynthia McKinney, is somebody who has also put out messages that are supportive of the Russian war effort in Ukraine. So even when they kick people off, they replace them with people who are pushing many of the same pro-Russian messages, pro-invasion messages. Let's finish this line. Yes, I have receipts. No, I'm not cherry picking. I am also not saying anyone who participates in is irrevocably is tarnished. I'm simply evaluating the stated purpose of the event as per the organizers themselves, and noticing it cannot possibly be an anti-war event as described. Embarrassingly, there is at least one featured participant who has a direct affiliation with the Russian state propaganda apparatus, and whose declared objectives is to vindicate Putin's war aims. Another smear, usually deplored as a scurrilous attack line, perversely vindicated. There is also one participant who is truly one of the most brazen and unrepentant con artists I have ever personally witnessed in American life, damn, who has personally declared overt affinity for Putin, even fantasizing sexually in public about his shirtless physique. Really, any rally like this is inevitably going to attract outliers and oddballs, some with extreme views. You think? Yeah, it's people on the political fringes, and people on the political fringes tend to be a little bit more crazy than people not on the political fringes. Any rally like this is inevitably going to attract outliers and oddballs, some with extreme views, and there would inevitably be disagreement among the participants on other issues. That's not the point. The point is about the very organizational premise of the event itself. I will say that I do think you can organize a rally without booking pedophiles who are trying to molest children as a speaker. I'll say that. I think that even though that's a little separate from the war, I think most organizations can probably Google a person and be like, oh, okay, I Googled him. It's like the 4th or 5th result on Google. I will not book this convicted, attempted child predator on my show, on my rally. The claimed purpose of the event is to promote an anti-war position, but given the irrefutable evidence to the contrary, it's unclear what the real purpose is, because the purpose was to besmirch and discredit any cognizable, I'm terrible with words, I'm terrible with the English language, anti-war position. They're doing a great job. Please note, retorts that go something like, but it's actually somehow anti-war to support the Russian war effort, are just a mirror image of the standard propaganda refrain from the pro-Ukraine war supporters who insist that deploying battle tanks is the real anti-war position. If you're shocked by this thread because you think you ordinarily agree with me on this topic, okay, I will not kowtow. If you wonder whether I might be personally offending people I'm otherwise friendly with, it's possible, but this is just my substantive view for better or worse. Okay, so that's his position. Now, of course, I could get in the trenches and be like, well, look, I don't know if I'm going to say that supporting Ukraine with weapons is the anti-war position, but I do think it's the morally right position. And here's why, right? I think that you do not, I think you should support the nation defending itself against a war of imperialism and annexation. And I can get all into the reasons, but that's not important. I've already talked to Michael Tracey at length. Maybe I'll talk to him again in the future. Who knows? We almost set that up, but I think it just fell through. Jackson Hinkle responds to this, saying, supporting Russia is anti-war. Russia isn't battling the West or Ukraine. It is deeper than that. They are defeating absolute evil. This is the last war against humanity. Russians are the only people who have found it in their hearts to defend the truth. Have fun siding with the Democrats and neocons, attacking this historic event. Look, I'm going to be for real. You look at this lineup, not a single person of substantial influence when it comes to real political power is booked on here. The closest is former Congress people. Former, meaning people who are no longer Congress people, no longer have to, get voted in and have political influence, and are now, cha-chinging, cashing in on the fact that they were Congress people. I'm not saying there's not any genuineness in it, but once you're a congressperson and you finish, you're good, right? Like, you don't need to worry about that anymore. So when we say this is a historic event, it's not going to do anything. Like, maybe it'll get you some followers, maybe some people will come out, but it's not going to change anything. It's not going to make America anti-sending aid. It doesn't look like this is going to spur any legislation into action. So when you say it's historic, in what way? Like, what is the history being made here? I mean, I don't know. Like, if maybe if they let the pedophile speak, it would have been history in the way that, like, it'd be the first anti-war rally in American history to headline a convicted child molester. I don't know. I have no clue what the historic portion of this is. But if you read this, this is like a comic book. People talk about, like, you know, Ukraine supporters thinking in Marvel movie terms, but, like, listen to this. Russia isn't battling Ukraine. It's deeper than that. They're defeating absolute evil. This is the last war against humanity. Russians are the only people who have found it in their hearts to defend the truth. They are literally fighting Ukraine. They are fighting the Ukrainian military. They are fighting Ukrainian civil defense. They are fighting the Ukrainian state. They are fighting Ukrainian soldiers. They are invading the nation that is internationally recognized as Ukraine. They are battling Ukraine. The majority of the people who are dying in this war, they are in Ukraine. In Ukraine. The civilians dying, Ukrainian civilians. They're in Ukraine. So they are battling Ukraine just by definition. Could you imagine, like, it could be an absolute evil. I don't think Ukraine is, but if I was invading Germany, I couldn't say, oh, I'm not fighting Germany. Yes, I am. Like, I could go on this long spiel about, oh, I'm fighting the absolute evil of Nazi Germany, of Nazism, and that would be true. But I'm also fighting Germany. No one would say, oh, it would be wrong to say we're fighting Japan in World War II. Yes, we were. No, we were fighting the evil of the imperial. No, we were fighting Japan. We could be fighting that too, but we're also fighting Japan. This is just virtue signaling, which is something I thought it was just up to the SJWs to do. Anyway, this is what was the interaction that led to this debate, that led to this being set up, because Jackson Hinkle wanted to debate Michael Tracey on this. Michael Tracey agreed, and so the debate is whether it is anti-war to support Russia invading. And this feels like a lot to me like a you know, freedom is like slavery is freedom, war is peace type situation, where if you invade Russia, if you support Russia invading Ukraine and going to war against Ukraine, then you're supporting the pro-war position. What you can do then is try to justify the war. You can say, look, I believe that for this, and that reason, the war was just. But you can't say it's an anti-war position. I mean, could you imagine if I said it's anti-war to invade Iraq because Saddam genocided his people? And that didn't even happen in Ukraine. There was no genocide in Ukraine. There was a genocide in Iraq against the Kurds. But that doesn't make it an anti-war position to invade Saddam Hussein. I could try to invade and topple his government. I could try to justify it. I could try to find justifications for the pro-war position. For example, I take the pro-war position in World War II. I say, yes, we should go to war with the Germans, with the Japanese, with the Italians. But don't pretend it's not a pro-war position. I think the problem is, though, in the minds of any people, ever saying you're pro-war in anything is like evil, because Jackson Hinkle, you know, he's the anti-establishment. He's not with the military-industrial complex, so he'd never be pro-war. Unless, of course, it's another country serving its own military-industrial complex. Then it's different. And I think he just doesn't want to accept the fact that he's pro-war. And I think that's where this stems from, to the point where he's just like denying reality itself. So let's watch the debate. I want to see Jackson Hinkle and Michael Tracey go at it. Here's Maupin defending Ritter, by the way. Anyone who takes a strong anti-imperialist stance is cancel, smear, and demonize. We gain nothing by going, sure, I'm anti-war, but don't worry, I'm not like that guy. They call all of us Nazis if they want peace with Russia. Don't give them an inch. He tried to molest children. His position on Russia-Ukraine aside, which is gross because he says that Ukraine should be put down like a rabid dog, and he's been wrong about this war since day one. He was wrong about them invading. He was wrong about how long the war would take. He was wrong about the effectiveness of the Russian military. He's been wrong about literally everything around this war. He was wrong about everything. Everything surrounding this war. Putting all that aside, I don't care what you think about the war. You should not be giving platforms to people who could possibly go out and use that platform to hurt children. Sorry. I'm sorry I'm such a purist against giving child molesters more ability to influence and get near children. Sorry. Very sorry. Okay, let's watch the debate. It's about time. I watched the debate, we mean listen to it, because it was in this Twitter space, so let's make of it what we can.
I could start off.
Yeah,
okay.
You go for it.
Okay, so, well, we all know why we're here.
Hold on. Brian, hold on. Wait, hold on. Hold on. Why would Brian be starting it off if the whole premise of this discussion is a debate between myself and Jackson Hinkle? Okay, I guess in that case, I'll start it off. And I'm going to remove Brian as a speaker for now. I'm happy to bring him back later, just so we can start off by kind of adhering to what at least the premise for this.
One last thing, by the way. I disagree with both Jackson Hinkle and Michael Tracey on this issue. Obviously, I disagree with Jackson Hinkle more on this issue because I think we should send aid to Ukraine. So for me, this is kind of like, no matter how this ends, I think I'll be fine. You know, I'll be satisfied no matter what happens, right? It's like if I see two boxers that I don't like, like boxing or like going at it, and they like both get like really messed up by the end of the boxing match. It's like, well, you know, you got what you wanted. Of course, you would never want that actually in boxing. You want people to be safe, but you get the general theme here. There's no L to be taken here, is what I'm saying. This is in a lot of ways just almost pure entertainment for me, because we're seeing the splinters, right? We're seeing the splintering as some people over on the other side of the aisle here are saying, wait a second, maybe it isn't anti-war to be next to the guy who denies Russian war crimes and says that we should bomb Ukraine. I think maybe that isn't the anti-war position. Just that small, what that little tiny slap of reality can do to these communities is insane, man. Let's watch. Let's let them fight.
Faces. So I guess to summarize, and Jackson, you know, feel free to jump in whenever you'd like. But an exchange was popped off within the past day or so between Jackson and myself, and also others who objected to my, I guess, assessment of this putatively anti-war rally that is being held on the 19th in Washington, D.C. I think it's called Rage Against the War Machine Rally, something to that effect. And here's my basic thinking on that rally and why I wrote the Twitter thread that I did on, when was it? Tuesday night. So, of course, I personally like and have an affinity for and have even just, you know, friendly personal relationships with a number of people who are participants in that rally. I don't purport to ever feel like I'm entitled or would even want to, you know, police ideologically the way that activists can organize amongst themselves in furtherance of an anti-war cause. You know, people have brought up parallels to, like, say, 2002 or 2003, when there was a common refrain among critics of anti-war activists that because the actual sort of organizing entity of many of the anti-war rallies at that time was this group Answer, ANSWER, the acronym, and that group was, you know, behind many of the prominent rallies. That sort of discredited or cast aspersion on the wider anti-war cause because that.
Okay, so I'm just going to be blunt here, and I'll just give for an example. There is a reason why when Jackson Hinkle and the rest of the people around him, they'll look at like a protest in Iran and they'll just say, oh, those are all foreign influenced color revolutions. And they say that to completely discredit the movement and move on. He said that about the people's movement in Iran. We've seen, I think it was Ben Norton, which Jackson Hinkle actually doesn't like Ben Norton. It's weird how these fringe people, not like fringe as in small, but like fringe as in politically fringe, fight on the fringes. It's actually really fun to watch. He said something similar about the people who are trying to fight against the fascist military junta in Myanmar. I don't understand how they're so like willing to say that's a color revolution, should be given no respect because an NGO gave this person or that person or this person money once, and therefore all of that movement against women's oppression, completely worthless. Color revolution, disregard it, don't support it, yada yada. But the idea that people directly taking money from the Russian government maybe should not be in an anti-war movement in the United States, because then it just looks like you're literally being puppeted by the Kremlin, right? No, that's different. You need to do everything you can to stop sending aid to Ukraine. That's different. That won't hurt us at all. Just take the money, take the money. Take the money, take the supporters. We'll take the pedophiles on. We'll allow the pedophiles to speak. Literally work with anybody possible. There's no bad ally. Honestly, in my viewpoint, do you want to know what it's like from my perspective? The more scumbags and people who are taking money from the Russian government and people who are just avidly like pro-Russia invading Ukraine that show up at these anti-war rallies, the easier my job is. The easier the job of most people who support Ukraine is, right? Like, makes it much easier, because I'm going to just be able to say, oh, the anti-war rally? You mean the anti-war rally who booked the child molester? The guy who wanted to molest children? You mean the anti-war rally that booked that one girl who tried to pin 9/11 on Israel? You mean the anti-war rally that booked multiple people who support Russia starting the war and invading? That anti-war rally, the anti-war rally with multiple people booked who denied the crime of Bucha, it just doesn't look good. It just makes it look terrible. I would not want to be with Saddam Hussein supporters during the anti-war movement in 2003. People going up on stage saying, what genocide? The Kurds love Saddam. That would undermine the movement, because then all you're going to get is a bunch of neocons going on Fox News the next day saying, you think these guys care about saving lives? These are just goons for the Iraqi government. Again, man, they understand it when it comes to color revolutions around the world and pointing at the women's movement in Iran saying, oh, you know, America actually said they support that, so therefore we can't have any support whatsoever. That's evil, that's bad, that's wrong, bad, terrible. But no, we can have people on literally on the Kremlin's payroll. That's fine. We can have people on. We can have people speaking here on the Kremlin's payroll. Yeah, absolutely. We can have people on here who took money from lobby groups from Bashar al-Assad. We can have actual convicted child molesters. We can have this, we can have that. I just think it's, you know, a little bit hypocritical is all.
Group was in some technical sense Stalinist, or there were Stalinist organizers within the group. I mean, you can go and Google that whole debate from the early 2000s if you'd like. That is what I would regard as something like an ideological policing attempt, insofar as because
So this is retweeted by Jackson. Situation north of Bakhmut City. Russian forces PMC Wagner took full control of the town of... Oh my god, I think I can bounce out. Following withdrawal of the Ukrainian army, took control of most of the hills, which overtook the town of... I don't understand why... You said this is him celebrating it? I'm sure he's happy that they did it, but... I mean, this is just a quote. This is just retweeting, like, the capture of a town. I couldn't make any statement off of this. But he has celebrated the capturing of towns and cities before.
Because the organizers of a particular rally happen to be Stalinist, that therefore tarnishes anybody else who might be associated with the rally and undermines the legitimacy of the wider cause that led to the initiation of the rally meeting to oppose the invasion of Iraq. I agree that that would be a...
Sneezy Shadows, thank you so much for the prime. I mean, it's up to 8 months, currently on a 3-month streak. 8 months of Dylan... Where the time goes, hey, I appreciate it. Rob Knorr, bring me on, Dylan, I want to talk. Is that actually Rob? You're more fun than the Twitter space. What did you want to talk to me about, Rob? How much time do I have left in today's stream? Of an hour and a half, and this is a long Twitter space. Okay, if we can do it quickly, Rob, then we can talk quickly. What is it about, Rob? Is it related to this? If it's related to this, then yes, quickly. But I do want to finish the Twitter space. Time for content? Yeah, let's see. What does he want to talk about? 10 minutes about drinking Mosshead Lager? You know what, Rob? Can I be honest? I am a featherweight. I'm a featherweight when it comes to... You know what's weird? I feel like my ability to drink alcohol changes geographically. When I was in Ukraine, I could, like, around, like soldiers, like, I felt like I could drink more. Maybe it was because my pride was more on the line when I was around soldiers and aid workers and was drinking with them all. But when I'm not, like, my ability to handle alcohol is that of a featherweight. I have never been a a big drinker. Never been a big drinker. Where were we? Oh yes, let's continue.
An invalid critique, you know, circa 2002. I just don't think that critique has anything to do with what I'm saying circa today in 2023. Because what I'm pointing out is that the organizing impetus of this particular rally is called into doubt by the extension of invitations to prominent public-facing roles by the organizers to individuals who, as I think Jackson will himself acknowledge in what she said to me numerous times on Twitter threads, are overt, explicit supporters of warfare in Ukraine. They happen to be supporters of the Russian government's warfare. They happen to be explicit, avowed advocates of the war aims set out by the Russian state. And they happen to be opposed to the American/Ukrainian stated war aims, but they're still...
I gotta say, man, no matter how long Michael Tracey, no matter how more correct Michael Tracey is, man, he takes his time with his words, man. He is a verbose man.
In favor of warfare.
A verbose speaker.
Hence them declaring themselves outright overt supporters of the Russian government's stated war aims. So if the anti-war rally, as it brands itself, go look at its promotional material on the website, on the Twitter feed, on the fundraising page that it has up, it's casting itself as this momentous anti-war rally that's the biggest that will have, you know, been held in the U.S. in some time. And that's the whole branding and, you know, advertising nature of this event. I mean, don't take my word for it. Take how they actually describe themselves. And you have, you know, people being extended invitations to, you know, Scott Ritter was one of them. I guess he's been disinvited at this point, but he was initially invited despite being on the record as declaring himself an overt partisan of the Russian war effort. I mean, which is a coherent position. I'm not saying it's argumentatively untenable to espouse that position. Like, you can make a coherent case that you think the pro-war position on Russia's behalf is justified because there's a long lineage of just war theory throughout the ages. So if you want to say that the Russian war effort is a just war, go ahead and make that argument. That's a intelligible argument, potentially.
Okay, I'm sorry. This is taking forever. I don't know if I'm going to skip through Michael Tracey's section. We'll try to wrap it up, listen to what Jackson has to say in response. But I got to say, there is something truly demented about debating whether invading a country to annex territory and bombing it is pro-war. Whether it's pro-war to advocate for mass bombings and invasions and the occupation of another territory. It's an impossible argument that you can only make by slithering around and trying to basically say, you can only make this argument if in your mind, war just immediately equals bad and never justifiable. Therefore, being pro-war is never justifiable. It's never justifiable. Therefore, we have to somehow say invading another country is not pro-war. So I feel like that's how it's done. Where I feel like Michael's argument here, honestly, I agree with it, that if you wanted to, the argument would be defend the Russian invasion on its face, saying this is why the pro-war position here is the correct one, right? That's the thing that should be happening. But instead of having that more obvious conversation, it's just like gaslighting everybody about what is bombing another country really pro-war? Is it really pro-war to invade Ukraine and take large swaths of territory and massively spike the amount of civilian, military, and all types of casualties being felt all across Ukraine? Like, come on.
And can be refuted or agreed with, but then to mischaracterize and conflate that argument as somehow an anti-war argument when what you're doing is explicitly making a pro-war argument, meaning you're making an argument in favor of a warring party's belligerent activity and I say belligerent just in this kind of technical international relations sense, in that both Russia and Ukraine are belligerents in this war. Co-belligerents include the United States.
I think the main thing that's going to hurt Michael Tracey in this is not only the fact that he's extremely verbose, and he's going to allow, I think, probably Jackson to kind of like walk all over him because he just talks so much that other people aren't going to really care when Jackson interrupts him. I think people probably aren't going to try to step in to stop it. But I think the other thing that's going to be difficult is this kind of a bit of fence riding we're going to see, where he's like, oh, he said that Russia was belligerent. Oh, we don't. Well, when I say belligerent, what I mean is they're both belligerents to the war. No, Russia did act in a belligerent nature. They acted in a belligerent nature in 2014 when they invaded Crimea. They acted in a belligerent nature when they tried to invade and take Kiev in 2022. I think just this ability to kind of like balance on the fence here is probably going to hurt him.
It's obviously NATO member states, Belarus, arguably, etc., Iran. So you can make that argument, but then what I object to here is really mostly on logical grounds and on grounds of really kind of public deception in casting these avowedly pro-war arguments as anti-war arguments, and then kind of insinuating that into what is being presented as an anti-war event, when some of the marquee speakers are the people who have been elevated by the organizers themselves. These aren't just random people who are appearing at the rally, or members of the public, or the kind of regular sort of cadre of sort of assorted eccentrics and weirdos who would showed up to any public protest. These are the invited speakers who are being portrayed as representative of the cause writ large, and Jackson's not the only one. Neither is Ritter. You could go down the line if you'd like. So that, I think, is it's a sophistry on the part of the debate organizers and participants. And I'm also not saying that anybody who
he can wrap it up now. He can wrap it up. He can wrap it up. This is always a problem with Michael Tracey, man, is he just does not know how to stop when he's ahead. He does not know when to just be like, okay, wrap it up. It's really it's almost like you just kind of just let him like run himself out like an Energizer Bunny
by their participation. I still, though, think that it's worth being intellectually honest and consistent in evaluating what this event is actually about and what the participants actually are on the record as in favor of.
Okay. So I'll just start off by saying that, yeah, I think supporting Russia right now, supporting Putin, is clearly anti-war.
Clearly.
And,
not only is it anti-war, it's clearly anti-war to support the invading nation. Why would anyone have reservations?
He's sort of, I don't think there's any discrepancy between the stated goals of the event and speakers like myself. But to make it clear for everyone who doesn't know, there are 10 stated demands from the Rage Against the War Machine event, which are not one more penny for war in Ukraine, negotiate peace, stop war inflation, disband NATO, global nuclear de-escalation, slash the Pentagon budget, abolish the CIA, abolish war and empire, restore civil liberties, free Julian Assange. So,
well, I mean, a lot of those actually restore civil liberties. I mean, what about the civil liberties of those in occupied territory who have been tortured and slaughtered by the occupation and dumped in mass graves? People who didn't get trials. Hell, we can even go back to 2014, 2015 Crimea about the Tatar activists that just ended up dead in rivers, right? Like, what about their freedom? What about their civil liberties? And when it comes to like nuclear de-escalation, what is the state that has been vague posting about blowing up the planet for the last year? The one country vague, well, there's two countries. One is North Korea. The other one is Russia. There's been vague posting about nuclear apocalypse. Russia, the United States hasn't increased its nuclear readiness level. The United States hasn't suggested we're going to nuke Russia. We're going to nuke the Russian troops in Ukraine. They haven't suggested that. It was the Russians who openly suggested it. I mean, much of it is chest pounding because they know if they were to do that, if they were to break the nuclear taboo, it'd probably be more bad for them. It'd probably have more negatives than positives. But I think there's multiple elements to this that make it so even the espoused goals of this espoused anti-war event cannot be upheld by somebody who supports the Russian invasion, because the Russian state has not upheld those things, not in Ukraine, not in his own country, and certainly not nuclear security and nuclear de-escalation. You think the Russians, do we honestly think that the Russian state, definitely considering the state of its current military, would want to be willing to give up its nukes? That it would be willing to agree with nuclear de-escalation? At least right now? I don't think so. I also don't think that we can say that they're a huge advocate or friend in that when they're the largest country on the world stage making these types of belligerent threats. Now, to be clear, there's multiple other things that I could agree with when it comes to like civil liberties in the United States and stuff like that, but those are some clear contradictions to anybody who supports the Russian invasion.
That alone just shows that, I mean, those are the aims of the event. The aims of the event don't say anything, and I know Michael's not claiming this to be the case, but the goal of the event is not to say everyone has to go support Putin or something like that. But what Michael is clearly laid out is that he thinks that there is a dilemma that has risen as a result of some people being overtly pro-Russia at an anti-war event. Now, I don't really understand Michael's argument.
Not pro-Russia, not pro-Russia, pro-Russia's war effort.
Okay, shut up, because I let you speak that entire time. I didn't interrupt you, okay? You can comment.
All right, I just want to clarify things. Yeah,
this is what I say after I'm done, okay?
Okay, go ahead. I apologize.
So, I don't understand. Okay, we all know what supporting Russia means right now, and what I mean by that, it's what Michael just said, supporting Russia's military operation in Ukraine. And the reason why I don't understand his argument is because there's a difference between anti-war and being a pacifist. And a pacifist is like Gandhi was a pacifist. Gandhi told, Jews that they should oppose war against the Nazis, when they were being killed by the Nazis. Gandhi told the Chinese when they were being invaded by Japan that they should choose pacifism, when we all know that, supporting defensive military operations in times like these are truly the only answer that are left for entities like the Jewish people or the Poles or the Soviets that were being slaughtered, or like the Chinese, or in this case, like the Russians and the people in the Donbass. I mean, I don't understand how anyone could look at, I know Michael was saying maybe you look at the contextual, the context of diplomacy over the past.
Okay, so even this doesn't make fucking sense. If you were a Chinese person who wanted to fight against the Japanese, rightfully, you are pro-war against the occupation, right? You are pro-war. If you are a anti-colonialist freedom fighter in Africa fighting against colonial oppression, and you wanted to pick up guns against the occupation, you're pro-war, a war of resistance, a war of liberation, a war of it's war. You're it's pro-war. Right? It could be good, it could be bad, but it's pro-war, right? Like, I have a pro-war position against the South during the Civil War. If I was there politically, that would be my position. That I'm pro-war against the secessionist traitors trying to uphold this evil institution, right? That would be my pro-war position. The anti-war position, because if you get to a certain point and you believe war is the only option left, then in that situation, you are pro-war. But war is a bad thing in our mind, so the idea that we would ever say, yes, we're pro-war is like, oh my God, that's terrible. And I understand that, but you can be pro-war even in scenarios where you agree that it would be really good that if we weren't fighting, right? Like, if you were in favor of rebelling against the Brits, even if you didn't want to be violent, that's a pro-war. You're pro-revolution. You're pro-fighting a revolutionary war against the British. So it is pro-war. That's first off. Second thing, he says, oh, this is a war to protect the people of the Donbass. 26 people died. I think it was 26 civilians. Was the max number for 2021 in the Donbass. 26. That number has been increased to astronomical numbers since 2021. To civilians in the Donbass. Civilians not only in the Donbass now, but also in Zaporozhye, also in Crimea, because there's now bombs going off in Crimea, also in Kherson, all across all oblasts in Ukraine. There is civilian deaths and even military deaths. Some areas like Eastern Ukraine obviously having the most intensity and increase when it comes to civilian and military deaths. So the idea that they came there to defend those people when the #1 killer of Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, through bombing, through artillery strikes, through missile strikes, through all of it, is the Russian government. I don't buy it. If the quote-unquote special military operations main purpose was defend Russian speakers, they've done a piss-poor job of it because there's more dead than ever in this war, in this conflict. If they didn't invade, those people would still be alive. And why would the Russians wait? If this was particularly about protecting the Russian speakers, why would they wait till 2022 when the numbers of civilian casualties in the Donbass had lowered to its like lowest rates in what, years? The time to do that would have been 2014, 2015, even though I will say, because I do want to emphasize this, that the whole idea of coming to defend the Donbass speakers, the Russian speakers, is ridiculous when a lot of the Russian speakers, in fact, the majority of the Russian speakers in Eastern Ukraine, don't want Russia to come defend them. And it was smart of them to not want them to come defend them because they're getting bombed and killed by the war. In fact, many of them feel backstabbed by the Russian state. When I was in Eastern Ukraine, all of the soldiers I met were speaking Russian. They weren't Ukrainioite, Banderite Nazis all speaking Ukrainian, beating the locals to say, you must speak Ukrainian. Most of the people I met from the local defense forces and everything, they all spoke Russian. They were locals. So I don't agree with this narrative at all. I don't agree with it at all. Big surprise.
Several years, the past decade or so, and you've come to the conclusion that you support Russia, but that's not anti-war. It is anti-war because if you look at what happened, first Russia tried to integrate in the West at the start of Putin's presidency. Then we saw that there was many attempts through this time.
He can do this all day. He can cherry pick and like only show certain information. Like, guess what? He's not going to talk about the economic coercion Russia engaged in 2014 in order to intimidate the Ukrainian government to not make economic deals with the EU after agreeing in the Budapest Memorandum not to go through economic coercion. He's not going to talk about Igor Girkin, his reports of holding Crimean politicians at gunpoint, telling them to dissolve the government after the Russian invasions, while the Russians were lying the entire time as they invaded Crimea and annexed it. They lied. They're saying we weren't doing it. I don't know what you're talking about. We're not going to talk about how these rebels in Eastern Ukraine got all this armored equipment, got all these bigger pieces of munitions and guns. Those don't just fall out of the sky. They come through suppliers. We're not going to talk about Russian troop involvement in the... He's not going to talk about any of that. He's going to cherry pick his examples. But that doesn't matter. He can go through any narrative he wants to. You cannot say that invading another country and then trying to annex its territory is an anti-war position. If you want to start and expand a war or expand a war, that's not an anti-war position. Doesn't make any sense. Like this, it's just gaslighting.
Up until about 2013, 2014. 2014, we saw, 2004, there was a coup in Ukraine. In 2014, there was another coup in Ukraine, the Maidan coup. Even during the Maidan coup, Russia was still trying to encourage Yanukovych to negotiate with the Nazi parties like Olia Tanyabuk in Ukraine. Then,
by the way, he says that Russia was trying to encourage them to negotiate. You know what? The American government, and he says that it was an American, that we organized the coup. He didn't say it here, but he has said that in the past. Many people don't know this, but we actually encouraged the Ukrainian protesters to accept the deal that the Ukrainian government offered, the Russian-aligned Ukrainian government offered at the time. But they went against American wishes and asked for his stepping down, asked for a wider anti-corruption campaign, asked for a lot more, and then Yanukovych said, it's too heated for me, and he fled. So... if that means that Russia was trying to be peaceful when they told them to negotiate, does that mean America was trying to be peaceful when we told them to negotiate? If he was being consistent, he would have to say yes. What he's not including here, though, is the hiring of Tutushki thugs that ended up murdering protesters. He's not talking about the actions of the Berkut that wrapped nails and screws on flashbangs before throwing them into crowds. He's not talking about the beating of protesters with metal poles, which it was that violence that led to Yanukovych fleeing because the people responded to that violence very understandably, very poorly.
And after that, when the Nazi party took over and we had all those actors in Ukraine, Russia still tried to negotiate with them up until, 2019, around when Zelensky.
See how he made that jump? So coup happens in his mind. He calls it a coup, whatever that means. Even though there was democratic election, whatever. Coup, right? He calls it coup. Then he makes a jump to 2019. What happened in between there? Wasn't there an invasion of Crimea that happened in there? But wait. There's a really big skip in the time. Wasn't there an invasion of Crimea? What did they do in the last 3-4 years there in the Donbass? Why didn't he mention the economic coercion when they tried to stop 20% of Ukraine's trade from leaving the country? Why not talking about any of that? See, he's cherry picking the information he presents in order to make Russia seem like a benevolent, thankful owner of the Ukrainian land. Like they're the father figure for these servile Ukrainians.
Got elected through the Minsk Accords and then through the Minsk II Accords, which Zelensky, Angela Merkel, other German officials, and John Bolton all over the span of the past 2 months have come out and admitted publicly that they were not trying to use the Minsk Accords for actual peace purposes, but instead to prepare Ukraine for their war against Russia.
But number one, it is weird that now that the Minsk Accords have shown to be a failure, that all the people that were involved with it are saying, that was the plan all along, right? And I don't know why Jackson Hinkle takes these Western establishment types at their word. Maybe he's a globalist shill in hiding, who knows? But let's say it is true. Is it really that crazy that the West would tell Ukraine, like, look, you need to have a ceasefire, you'll settle this later, but like Russia, if they don't get what they want, they might invade again in the future. You got to be ready. That's completely understandable. Like if my country was invaded, I would do everything I could to prepare my country to engage in resistance if it was necessary. And it's not like the Ukrainians were, they were provoking war. The Russians invaded not because there was going to be some big change in the balance of power. They invaded. I mean, I guess we'll never truly know until this war's over and all the secrets come out. But they invaded not when, Ukraine was about to join NATO. They didn't invade on the eve of a Ukrainian offensive that was going to take Russian land. That's what Russia claims, but there's no evidence of it, right? They invaded when Ukraine was not going to do anything to attack them or take land back from that we know of at the moment. Maybe there was plans for 5-10 years in the future, but that's not what the Russians said, and that's not what the Russians have provided evidence of.
Russia didn't want war. Russia's tried to, bring peace at every single, stage of this process.
Again, the Russians engaged in the economic coercion in 2014 that they promised they wouldn't do in the Budapest Memorandum. Then, when Yanukovych promised that he would do the economic deal with the European Union that would allow visa-free travel and a bunch of economic benefits, he went back on that promise. He went back on that promise after the Russian government engaged in economic coercion. This caused the protest movement. Yanukovych, being Russian-aligned and being scared of the protest movement, sends the cops out to beat the shit out of him. That causes Ukrainians to get angry. They start protesting against his government. Eventually, he flees the country after negotiations fail. That is when Russia invades Ukraine while saying the whole time that they're not doing it. They deny it the whole time, lie about it the whole time. They invade Crimea, annex it, hold politicians at gunpoint, according to Igor Girkin, former FSB agent and former Minister of Defense for the Donetsk People's Republic, Jackson's boys. Then they engage in warfare for the next 8 years along somewhat static front lines after it stabilizes in the Donbass. Then, in 2022, Russia for months denies there's ever any idea they're going to invade. It's all training exercises. It's all training exercises. It's all training exercises. They then put all their troops on the border. They say it's all training exercise. Don't worry about it. They'll never invade. Then they invade. And they try to topple the entirety of the government. They've pushed this forward at every point in the war. They've pushed this forward and heightened the crisis. And they try to get more and more and more out of it, out of heightening the crisis. To say that they have tried to make peace at every point is absolutely ridiculous, because the only peace they would be willing to accept would be peace on their terms. Because when Jackson Hinkle says, they're willing to negotiate peace, what Jackson Hinkle's peace is Russia gets Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhia, Kherson. It's demilitarized. It's not allowed to join any defensive agreements. It's not allowed to make any economic deals with the European Union. It has to join the Russian Economic Union. And Zelensky government has to go away. The democratically elected leaders of Ukraine have to go. That's like the bare minimum. So for a lot of Ukrainians, they're going to see that and say, yeah, obviously we're going to fight a war instead of accept those terms.
And then throughout all this time, 2014 onward, we saw that 15,000 civilians were slaughtered by Ukrainian authorities in the Donbass.
Just not
Russia,
true.
I think, should have taken the...
I don't know if like I should like if every time he lies, do I have to stand up and say that's a lie? Like the number one, I think the number is like 14 to 15,000, and that's the totality of casualties in the Donbass. The casualty the number he stated includes Ukrainian military casualties. Meaning that his casualty number for the amount of civilians the Ukrainian military killed includes Ukrainian soldiers. Like, whatever.
These defensive actions to protect the people that were being slaughtered in the Donbass with heavy artillery supplied by NATO long ago. I think they should have done this long ago. I don't think they should have...
Where did the heavy artillery where did the heavy artillery that the rebels got come from? Do you think they just like magically appeared? They just like poofed into existence? Like, oh, where did the rebels get all this heavy artillery? They must have just had it, lying around. I've got like 3 artillery guns in my basement in case, civil war ever breaks out.
Waited till, a year ago almost today to do this. And many people within the Donbass in Russia reflect the sentiment. The Communist Party of the Russian Federation also reflects the sentiment. They've been advocating this for many years. And, so you have to draw the conclusion that Russia didn't have any other options. Russia's options were either continue to get cucked by the West.
What were they going to do? Okay. What was going to happen if they didn't invade Ukraine? What was the terror scenario? What was the terror scenario? Let me hear it.
Allow NATO to install more heavy artillery along the Donbass, potentially do a full-scale invasion into the Donbass with Ukrainian military personnel, and the Russians would have had to sit back and watch thousands more Ukrainian, Russian, ethnic Russians be slaughtered in the Donbass by these, Ukrainian Nazis. And they also would have, been risking escalation to nuclear war of the Ukrainians and NATO forces right on their border.
Okay, so let's go this. Number 1, Russia gets cucked. I don't care if Russia gets cucked, okay? You just, whatever, who cares? Number 2, this could lead to the Ukrainians building up their military. Why are the Ukrainians building up their military? They're building up their military because they were scared that Russia was going to invade them. And then what did Russia do? They invaded them, justifying their military buildup as reasonable and justifiable. The reasons the Russians want them to demilitarize is so that they can control them, so the Ukrainians can't resist them if they put soldiers in their capital and start executing people. So that's the first thing, okay? Second thing, that they slaughter all these civilians. Oh my God, it could lead to civilians dying. More civilians have died in the last year of fighting than the last 8 years of fighting in the Donbass combined. So if the priority for the Russians was to protect Russian speakers, which, by the way, are dying at a much higher percentage due to the proximity of the conflict in eastern Ukraine, meaning that, again, the Russians are the main killer of Russian speakers in Ukraine. If that's true, that was the purpose, then that has been a massive failure, because Ukrainian speakers and Russian speakers have had a massive increase in casualties all across the front line. 21 civilians died in 2021, the time period in the Donbass, in that time period for the 2021 year. If to compare that to 2022 is impossible. It is impossible. The amount of casualties that have expanded because of this war, because of this invasion, is horrific, and it's not comparable. So if the goal was to protect civilians, it's really failed at that, huh? Like if I told you guys the goal of the invasion of Vietnam was to protect civilians, I think we could very concretely conclude that our involvement in the Vietnam War probably did not meet that end. Even if we could talk about, well, the Viet Cong executed this, even if we were to go to the worst crimes the Viet Cong did, American involvement in the Vietnam War increased civilian casualties by an astronomical amount, and so did the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Potentially doing something within Russia itself. So Russia's actions are purely defensive, and saying that you are taking a stand of support, this is the last thing I'll say, saying that you're taking a stand of support for defensive responses to a war that was not started by Russia. This war was started by the West.
Russia invaded Crimea. Russia then invaded the Donbass. They then invaded the rest of Ukraine. They have pushed the war, invading land and territory for the entirety of the war. Ukraine has not invaded Russia once in the entirety of this conflict. They have not gone in like, hey, we're going to take this land here, we're going to take that land here, we're going to take all this internationally recognized Russian land. That hasn't happened.
Is not the same thing as saying that you're pro-war. And in fact, Michael, you responded to Nathan J. Robinson when Nathan J. Robinson...
Again, like, it is pro-war to say that the Russians should invade another country. It is by definition pro-war. Being pro-war means you're in favor of fighting a war. And you are in favor of the Russians fighting a war in Ukraine. This is war is peace, freedom is slavery, man. That's all this is.
And quote retweeted me and said that, you know, you can't claim that you're anti-war, Jackson, because every partisan in every war always thinks that they're defeating absolute evil. In the same way that there was United States officials who believed that they were defeating absolute evil when they were waging war crimes against the people of Afghanistan, Iraq, and Vietnam. And you agreed with him. You said, well put. So my question to you is, how on earth could you ever even come close to comparing the sentiments of those who committed war crimes, gruesome war crimes, in what are clearly not just military ambitions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam, to what Putin is doing in a defensive operation in Ukraine?
There was no fucking Russian 9/11 from Ukraine. There was no Ukrainians hijacking a fucking airliner saying "Slava Ukraini, Bandera to the end," and just like ramp into the Kremlin, killing 3,000 people. Okay, that never happened. There was nothing to defend from in 2014. There was nothing to defend from on the Ukrainian side. Right? There wasn't. The Russian state was not under any threat of invasion from Ukraine. They weren't under threat of Russia 9/11, where Stefan Bandera like hijacks an airliner, crashes it in the Putin's mansion. That didn't happen. That didn't happen. And I think the reason you can compare it is because, well, if anything, I would go further when we talk about I would go further when it comes to just the heaps of evidence of war crimes is so much more overwhelming. Maybe that's due to the availability of camera phones now in comparison to early invasion of Afghanistan. I guess like that's a difference that the Ukrainians have in order to document these types of atrocities in comparisons to the Afghans. But we have seen mass graves filled in Bucha and Izium. We have footage of Russian soldiers shooting Ukrainians in the back of the head while they're walking away. We have telephone conversations of Russian soldiers calling back for home, admitting to war crimes. We have satellite images of masses of bodies left behind by the Russian army. But it's there while they're occupying it. Where did the bodies come from, Jackson? Did they just magically float down? Did the Ukrainians sneak behind enemy lines, stab them all, sneak back, only for the Russians to come out and cry over the corpses? Get out of here, man. Get out of here. Come on.
Okay, first, just technically, for some reason when I'm on Twitter Spaces, my voice apparently sounds like I have a massive lisp.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
Is this any better because I sort of changed my setup?
I think it happens to everyone.
Do I sound normal?
It happens to me too.
Do I sound any better at this like this?
Okay, I'm not confident in Michael's ability to push back on much of what Jackson said, because I feel like the problem with Michael is I feel like he's just gonna sit on the fence. He's just gonna sit on the fence. What he needs to do here is push back against much of the narratives that Jackson's put forward, but unless he's going to talk about the economic coercion and all these other things we've already covered, I feel like it's just going to be like, we're just going to be talking definitions, which, I mean, he could. I mean, it's not that difficult to just simply say, hey, Jackson, it is pro-war to be in favor of invading a country. You can try to call it defensive, but even being in support of a defensive war can be considered pro-war. But also, this isn't defensive. But I don't think he's able to make that, or I don't think he's able to establish that it isn't defensive. I don't know if he's got the gumption to do it, or the ammo.
Fun.
I guess it doesn't matter. Okay. All right. So, Jackson, all the rationales that you just laid out there for why it is that you support Russia's current war effort.
It's not going to push back on any of it.
Again,
oh my God.
Those are potentially coherent rationales that one can
no, they aren't.
either agree or disagree with.
They're not
But
coherent.
the rationale that you're setting forth is for why you're in support of the war effort, meaning why you are pro the current Russian war effort, hence making a pro-war argument. I mean, at a certain point, it really is just about basic conceptual clarity here. Now, let me just give you a parallel that I think highlights this. Since the beginning of the war, at least since February of last year, I've almost entirely been in antagonistic dialogue.
I mean, here's another example. Here's another example. Pearl Harbor. We were attacked by the Japanese on Pearl Harbor, but if you were to go onto the congressional floor, you're voting for what? You're voting for war. You're taking the pro-war position. This is just, Jackson's position is completely indefensible.
With people who are pro-Ukraine war effort, right? So people who are in favor of whether it's the provision of weaponry by the U.S. or the operational coordination that the U.S. is engaging in Ukraine, or the endless escalatory measures that the U.S. principally has effectuated in Ukraine on in opposition to Russia. And the argument that I'll always get when I characterize those measures as pro-war is, well, no, this isn't a pro-war policy. We're not advocating for anything that's pro-war. This is a defensive war on behalf of Ukraine to defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty against an invader country, Russia. And I made the same argument with them that I'm making here with you now, which is that you can argue that the U.S./Ukraine war effort is a just war that can be agreed with or disagreed with. But you can't say it's an anti-war argument because you're making an affirmative, proactive defense of and justification for warfare activity. I mean, I maybe this is kind of a...
Honestly, Michael Tracey could have just made a statement like in a minute, right? And then he could have spent the rest of the time pushing back against that. But he's not pushing back against all the narratives that Jackson laid out. He's not going to push back against any of them. So they're just going to float in the air with no pushback whatsoever. But like a lot of times with Michael Tracey, it's just he'll make his point, and then I feel like he just feels like he needs to fill the air time when he really doesn't.
Trivial point, or maybe it's like a overly obvious point, but I think clarifying just the basic terminology is actually necessary here, because if you dilute the terminology and allow for all these conflations and kind of over extrapolations to settle in as replacements for what is just otherwise common sense terminology, in that if you're making an argument in favor of a war, you're pro-war, then I think we're also losing something that's actually fundamental on a conceptual level, or we're allowing that to be obfuscated. So, your whole point about how Russia would be is justified to defend the Donbass, or that Russia is legitimately in fear of its security needs by way of the U.S./NATO encroachments on its border, or whatever else you might want to say in favor of the Russian war effort. In saying it, you're lending credence to and giving a justification for a pro-war effort. I'm sorry, an invasion, and I notice, I don't know why you necessarily do this, but you seem to be using the sort of euphemism about a special military operation. I guess it's not that pertinent, but for, again, conceptual clarity, I'm just going to refer to it as a war or an invasion, because it is. I mean, Russia did invade the country. You're looking at a war.
Be careful, though. Jackson Hinkle doesn't think Ukraine has a right to exist, so he might say, actually, the Ukrainian nation state isn't real. It's a manifestation of Western imperialism
that's underway, and saying that support for that war is anti-war. No, it's just not the case. It's just flatly, oxymoronically contradictory. Again,
Jackson,
make
go
an
ahead.
argument that it's a just war if you'd like, But it's not an anti-war argument. It's a pro-war argument. It just is.
Okay, but the reason why I refer to it as such is because this is not Russia's war in the same way that...
Yes, it is.
In the same way that World War II was not Stalin's war, or you know, the Jewish people's war. It was Hitler's war. You say, well, okay.
This is the worst comparison in the world. Adolf Hitler, at the start of World War II, had German soldiers dress up in Polish uniforms and then attack German positions, and then use that as a justification to invade Poland, saying, this is a defensive war. The world says this is aggressive, but this is the fight for the ethnic German speakers of Danzig, and we were attacked. It is literally like almost like directly comparable to the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where the Russians are saying we are here to defend the ethnic Russians and Russian speakers of Ukraine. Also, the Ukrainians are planning a super scary, spooky invasion of Russia, and we need to stop them. And then they released footage of the so-called Ukrainian invasion, and it was geolocated, and it was shown to be within already occupied territory, meaning it was Russian soldiers dressed up in Ukrainian uniforms to make it look like Ukraine was invading Russia. Why would Ukraine invade Russia? Everybody knows that Ukraine can't invade and conquer Russia. It doesn't make any sense. But the Russians had to have some justification to make the war look defensive. It's just that Jackson ate all of that up. This is the worst comparison he could possibly pull from.
Russia invaded Ukraine. They went into Ukraine, yes, long after the West invaded Ukraine, deposed their sovereign government, made Ukraine a non-sovereign state in 2014 onward, filled it with Nazis in government, and then took those Nazis to task to the aim of slaughtering people in the Donbass. So the West invaded Ukraine long before Russia invaded Ukraine. And
there's no, I mean, he's just playing word games right now. The West hasn't put any soldiers on Ukrainian soil to capture territory or get demand, like, you must give us this, Ukraine, and we will attack. That hasn't happened. It's completely just not true. The Ukrainian government has actively welcomed Western support. And if you were to poll the majority of Ukrainians, check their polling on what their view of Russia is and what their view of the West is. It's not that surprising that they want to join the Western bloc, quote unquote.
I see, Samir, you got your hand up. You want to ask a question. But the reason why we say, I and many others say that, and why so many people were frustrated with your commentary on the matter, is because you can't look at you can't look at this in a vacuum and just look at this from February 24th onward. You do have to look at the context here, and the context clearly shows us that Russia was responding to something that was happening, something that
what they did is they tried to thumb their finger in the eye of Ukraine in 2014 when they tried to use economic coercion to make them join their economic union over making economic deals with the European Union. Because Russia believes that Ukraine is not allowed to exist. And they said this. This isn't me making up the words. Putin said this in his speech, the speech that Jackson loves. He said it is impossible for Ukraine to exist as not an extension of the Russian state. Meaning that there is no place in Putin's mind for Ukraine to exist where it's like, hey, cool beans, Russia, but I want this economic deal with these guys, not you. Meaning that Russia is saying that it has full control over Ukrainian foreign policy, Ukrainian economics, and if it ever tries to tie up with the West too much, it has the right to come in, put its thumb on the scale, even after it promised in the Budapest Memorandum it wouldn't do that. And it took advantage of Ukraine's position of weakness economically and its position of stability after the collapse of the Soviet Union to make sure that its nukes were gone, so that it wouldn't run into that problem later. I mean, I don't know how he can look at that. Look at them basically going to the Ukrainian government and saying, if you make this deal with the Europeans, we're going to stop all trade. In fact, we're stopping trade now. Yanukovych caves, going back on his campaign promise. That starts the ball rolling. And he says, obviously that was Ukraine's fault. For what? Forever thinking that it could do deals with anybody else? Then the Russians? What are the Russians? The mafia? They come in, you have to pay for your protection, you got to pay for your protection over here. They shouldn't be acting like the mafia, and it's not surprising that considering Russia's historical abuses towards Ukraine and their modern abuses towards Ukraine, they want to look towards a different system of governance.
They tried every attempt at making peaceful proposals to prevent from happening, and then on top of that, the special military operation in and of itself, which is a response to NATO invading Ukraine, is simply an effort to prevent an actual war from breaking out, because this is not really, truly, deeply a world war yet. It's a Sitzkrieg. It's the war before the war. Sure, there's a lot of people dying, and that's terrible. But Russia, what they're trying to do right now is prevent Ukraine from becoming, the match that sets off World War III. That's what I know it's like when you look at this in the vacuum and when you look at this in this tiny little span of life that we have here on this earth, it looks bad.
Dog, I'm sorry. They invaded Ukraine. They're conquering their territory, annexing their territory, and they've been doing this shit for 9 years. They need to stop playing the victim. They need to stop playing the victim, man.
Like Russia's the aggressor, but they're not. If you support Russia at this point in time, you are anti-war because you are trying to stop the madness from spiraling.
To be clear, when it talks about World War III, the United States and the West aren't chest pounding like the Third World War is upon us. We will march on Moscow. That isn't happening in the West. That isn't happening. If you go turn on Russian state media, what do you hear? Our nukes could hit Berlin. Our nukes could burn Dublin to the ground. London could be in flames. Just like constant chest pounding about this. The West has no desire for a third world war. That's why Biden himself promised that he would not put American soldiers in Ukraine fighting Russian soldiers under current conditions. Why? Because after so many wars, Americans are pretty tired of it. But if Ukrainians are willing to fight their own liberation struggle, why not give them the tools to do so? This isn't the prelude to the biggest third world war, and by Russia fighting this war now and killing all these people and bombing all these civilians, what they're really doing is looking out for the world. Really? What's the world's perspective on that? Because every single UN vote that comes up, Russia loses it on the war, with the vast majority of people condemning their nation. It seems like the majority of the world don't think that Russia's fighting for them in world peace. It sounds like the majority of the world thinks they should leave.
Into what the West wants it to be.
Okay.
Yeah,
let me say one thing.
I just have a really quick point. Earlier, you said that Jackson did not define those terms that he was making arguments why it was like a just war, but Jackson clearly made a distinction between being anti-war and being a pacifist, but you seem to have ignored that. Do you recognize the difference between those two things? Because it seems that if
you are in favor of fighting a war, you're pro-war. You're pro-war in that scenario. Being pro-war can be good, it can be bad, it depends on the situation. Most of the time, it's probably bad. But there's been multiple times in human history where being pro-war was the correct position. Jackson's just not in one of those times. He's against one of those times.
Treat them as like synonymous, but they're not. As
okay.
Jackson.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I meant to address that. No, I don't.
Right, it's not a good point. Oh my God.
Anonymous. I'm not making an argument for pacifism. I think you can be anti-war.
Well, I think you are.
I think you can be an anti-war in particular. You can be anti-war in particular instances and not be an overarching philosophical pacifist. So, for instance, you can be anti-war in the case of this conflict in Ukraine, insofar as you can oppose the warfare from whatever belligerent parties are waging it in Ukraine, but you can support some other war 5 years from now. Hence, you wouldn't be a pacifist. You would be anti-war in particular circumstances. So I'm not making an argument for pacifism per se. I'm not even saying I'm personally a pacifist. I'm more arguing for definitional and conceptual clarity. I mean,
but your definition of anti-war is the definition of pacifism. That's what we're trying to say.
No, it's not. I mean, my definition of anti-war is, as per this conflict, which is what the whole rally's about, is that if you're pro the warfare of a particular warring party, whether it's Ukraine or Russia or the U.S. or NATO, then you are not in any meaningful sense anti-war. You're just not.
What does that mean that you're a pacifist in every regard? What is that? Okay, so if you don't think that you can be...
Here's the question. Is it pro-war to want to bomb ISIS and kill them? No, it isn't, because ISIS was the one who did it is pro-war, but I think it's justifiable for the world to get together and try to get rid of ISIS. I think that's a valid war to fight. I mean, is this really that difficult to comprehend and wrap our minds around?
Anti-war and support Russia's special military operation. What do you think the aims of the special military operation are?
I mean, just think about what you're saying. I hope people who are listening can try to think about this.
Wait, jibber jabber.
If you're not in favor of Russia's military operation, you're not anti-war. And so you're saying you don't think you can be in favor of Russia's special military operation and be anti-war. You're saying in favor of a warfare operation, an invasion operation. How is being against that?
It's not an invasion. It's defense of the people in the Donbass that are being slaughtered. So answer the question.
Being slaughtered by mostly the Russians.
What do you think the goals of the people and what do you think the goals of the special military operation are?
What do I think? I mean, it doesn't matter what I think. It's what the people who are.
Here's the problem with Michael Tracey is it's very hard for him to ever take a position on something, definitely on something like this. And so this is going to be the majority of the conversation moving forward. I mean, we could just listen to what the Russians said. The demilitarization of Ukraine. Now it's very obvious. It's also the annexation of land. They wanted to remove the Zelensky government. That failed. And I guess the stopping the expansion of NATO, which also hasn't gone well, considering that NATO looks like it is closer to expanding into Sweden and Finland.
The invasion state that they are. I mean, I've read the Putin speech on February 24th of last year. He lays out the goals. I have no real reason to think that they've changed.
So what are the goals?
And if you agree with Putin's stated rationale for why he launched the, preemptive war, then that's fine in terms of just conceptual cohesion.
Wait, did you
it's not anti-war. I mean, do you think Putin was making an anti-war speech when he announced the invasion on February 24th? I mean, it's just absurd. It's just like this bizarre inversion of basic commonsensical logic and rhetoric.
Okay.
Jackson's a better debater here. Michael Tracey's kind of like fence sitting is really undermining him here. I don't even know why Samira spoke up and decided I'm going to make this a 2v1. That honestly makes it look better for Michael when Jackson probably could have probably not steamrolled him just generally just completely blown him out, but like he was doing fine because Michael was like refusing to engage with a lot of what Jackson said because he doesn't know how to push back against pro-Russian talking points. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because he just wants to be verbose on many other topics. Who knows?
Before we get into a bizarre,
let me give you an illuminating
Michael, you never answered the question. Michael, you never answered the question. So the question before we get into
what was that? Can we go back? I thought I heard something.
Is that if you're pro the warfare of a particular warring party, whether it's Ukraine or Russia or the U.S. or NATO, then you are not in any meaningful sense anti-war. You're just not.
What does that mean that you're a pacifist in every regard? What is that? Okay, so if you don't think that you can be anti-war and support Russia's special military operation, what do you think the aims of the special military operation are?
I mean, just think about what you're saying. I hope people who are listening can try to think about this.
Wait.
Against that,
it's not an invasion. It's a defense of the people in the Donbass that are being slaughtered. So answer the
dude. It's so fucking dude. He has the virtue signal constantly. He has the virtue signal constantly. No, you can't call it an invasion. It has to be the special military operation. You got to use my preferred pronouns for the war. Look, it is an invasion. Everybody would agree it is an invasion. If I look up Russian invasion, of Ukraine. 2022, Russian invasion of Ukraine. Everybody calls it an invasion. You can call it the great liberation of the true Russian speakers against the Ukrainian pig dog swine. You can call it whatever you want in your head, but it is an invasion. They took troops and moved it into the territory of another nation, trying to take that land. That is an invasion. That is a nation invading. That is an invasion, whether you want to call it that or not. It's just definitionally an invasion.
Question. What do you think what do you think the goals of the people and what do you think the goals of the special military operation are?
What do I think? I mean, it doesn't matter what I think. It's what the people who are carrying out the invasion state that they are. I mean, I've read the Putin speech on February 24th of last year. He lays out the goals. I have no real reason to think that they've changed.
So what are the goals?
And if you agree with Putin's stated rationale for why he launched the, preemptive war, then that's fine. In terms of just conceptual cohesion.
Wait,
it's not anti-war. I mean, do you think Putin was making an anti-war speech when he announced the invasion on February 24th? I mean, it's just absurd. It's just like this bizarre inversion of basic commonsensical logic and rhetoric.
Before we get into a bizarre,
let me give you an illuminating
Michael, you never answered the question. Michael, you never answered the question. So the question before we
just answer it. He should just say it.
bizarreness.
He should just say it. I don't know why Michael Tracey isn't saying it.
The question was,
yeah, man, it's just the fence sitting that's hurting him. It's the fence sitting and verboseness on stuff that doesn't need that much dialogue.
I didn't say Putin was bizarre.
You said his speech was a bizarre inversion of logic.
No, he said that you saying that his speech isn't anti-war is a bizarre inversion of logic, which is true.
It's bizarre to say that his speech was an anti-war speech when he was announcing the commencement of a war.
Michael, shut the fuck up for a second. Answer the question. What do you think the goals of the special military operation are?
Well, it doesn't matter what I think they are.
It just looks terrible here. He should just say what they are. He should just say what they are. Whether it doesn't matter shouldn't, like, at this point matter because he's asked it so many times, and now it just looks like you're dodging. Like, you just answer the question.
I defer to what Putin...
He could have Googled them in the time necessary, as much time as we've been, like, floundering around this point.
Said in the speech. What are they?
I mean,
if you want me to shut the fuck up, I'll shut the fuck up.
No.
It doesn't matter what my rendering of the objectives are. The people who are waging the war set out the objectives.
What are they? What are the goals?
What difference does it make how I put
he just looks like he's dodging it. Why is he not just answering the question? Could he genuinely not know even like what Putin remember? I mean, he might just not remember the speech or the original reasons. I can understand some confusion around it because like originally the idea of annexing territory was like only in the Donbass, then it expanded once the Russians failed and they had to justify their war because they weren't removing Zelensky's government. They haven't demilitarized the country. They had to get something, and so they started clawing away at territory like Kherson, Zaporozhye, etc. So I understand like the exact goals of the war have changed over time because we now all kind of know that the Russians aren't taking Kiev, right? But I still think you could name a few. Just say any of them.
Words what the goals of the operation are. Look at the text of the speech.
The reason why this is important, Michael, is for the same reason why I was so outraged when you said that Nathan J. Robinson put it well when he said that there's no differences between the mentality of those. What did he say? And what did you agree with?
I'll pull it up right now. Hold on, just so I have the exact.
Okay, and we're not going to leave this question I have for you. We're going to come back to it, but
sure.
Put the thing.
He says, here's what Nathan J. Robinson said, in which I said that he put well. Quoting here, quote, "One thing I wish everyone understood, since the world might be such better off if they did. Every side in every war thinks they're battling absolute evil. Usually they're just slaughtering normal people who wish they could get back to their lives. This is constant across history." I do think that's well put. I think that could be also said for
that wasn't all
Ukraine
he said.
Right now.
There's just fence setting. He's just fence sitting here. I mean, like, it is true against Jackson Hinkle's statement that just saying my side is the other side's absolute evil like means nothing. But I mean, again, this just sounds like fence sitting.
Wasn't all he said.
Which thinks that Russia is the embodiment of all evil and Putin is Hitler and so on and so forth.
Why did you leave out part of his tweet?
That's the entirety of the tweet. I just read it.
And then the second part of the tweet says, Bush.
That's the whole tweet.
No, dude. There's a thread. There's two tweets.
Dude. There's one.
And you said you responded, Michael. You responded to it and said, "Well put." It said the second part of the tweet says, George W. Bush thought he was fighting the forces of darkness and evil as he was slaughtering Iraqis and Afghans. LBJ and Nixon thought they were defeating communism as they bombed peasants. Putin thinks he's defending the Nazis. Every person who does evil is the good guy in their own story. So the reason why knowing what Putin's objectives are is important is because Putin's objectives of the special military operation, as I'm sure you will admit momentarily when you tell me what they are not the same as slaughtering innocent Iraqis, Afghans, or Vietnamese with bombs or...
What? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, now this is stupid. Okay, Jackson Hinkle, I don't know if he knows nothing about any of these wars. The goal of invading Iraq wasn't just to kill a bunch of Iraqis. The goal of intervening against the Viet Cong, against communist expansion into Vietnam, wasn't just to kill a bunch of Asian people or Vietnamese people. That wasn't the goal of the war. But sometimes along the path to whatever your goal is in a war, you basically decide, like, I'll do anything that's necessary to win. Or your view of the enemy means that you're willing to do anything to them because you don't respect them, right? You don't see them as human, or any number of reasons. But the reason we invaded Iraq wasn't just to kill Iraqis. We wanted to replace, I mean, there's a bunch of reasons you could say, but the most basic rundown of it is we wanted to replace Saddam's government in Iraq with a different one. Either you could say it was for freedom and democracy, which I don't really buy too much of. You could say it's for, you know, oil or resource. You can say whatever you want in the world. I don't care. But the purpose of it in nobody's mind was, I just want to go out and just like mow down Iraq. That wasn't the reason we invaded. If we wanted to mow down people, like, then it would have been like any country in the world. Why Iraq in particular? It was because of the geopolitics of George Bush's father. It was because of Cheney and Bush's view. Like, none of this was, we're just going to go in and kill a bunch of Iraqis, right? You can say they conducted the war poorly to the point where they didn't care about civilian casualties. The same thing you could say about Vietnam. You could talk about the dehumanization of Vietnamese people that happened during the Vietnam War. You could talk about any of those things, but that wasn't the purpose of the war. And Jackson Hinkle's mind, he just laid it out that we invaded Iraq and Vietnam to just kill a bunch of people, while Russia invaded Ukraine for liberation and freedom and awesome and gumdrops and fucking cotton candy clouds. He just created a fantasy. He's created a fantasy in his mind where when America does something, it's bad and it's evil, but when Russia does something, it's cool and it's to save people and it's awesome and it's not, and like civilians are being saved here. It's just fantasy land.
Or napalm gas.
Well, no,
so
I'm not saying they're the same.
So tell me again, what are the stated goals of the special military operation? Because
I mean, I don't know why you're trying to give me a pop quiz. I mean, I'm telling you, read the speech if you want to know what the stated aims are. What does it matter how I personally characterize them? It's just a diversion.
Because this is what the whole debate is about, and you can't. Do you even know what they are?
But of course I do. I've read the speech. So
what are they?
I know what Russian officials say. The stated.
He should just say them. It just looks like he's scared. That's all for Michael Tracey on his side. It just looks like he's scared. But by the way, we're talking about this because we can't just talk about the fact that, again, Jackson Hinkle is saying that it's anti-war to invade another country and try to annex his territory. That it's anti-war to invade another country. Okay, that's his position, and it's such a ridiculous position that eventually we've pivoted out of it, and now we're gonna quiz Michael Tracey and all the tidbits and facts about the war, because if we stay on that fact for too long, Jackson will look too silly.
Names are.
So what are they?
I mean, so you're saying because
why can't you answer
personally agree, I guess, with the stated aims of the Russian war effort.
What are they?
Anti-war.
Do you even know what they are?
Any military action that Russia undertakes ostensibly pursuant to those.
While again, Michael Tracey looks bad. This is no different than when Mike from PA did the "What's the Tiff" thing with Vosh. It's not really that different. He should know it and he should say it, but this is fundamentally separate from the discussion that's being had. As in, it's not addressing the main issue of whether or not it's pro-war to support invading other countries for territory.
Objectives, right? So if it bombs energy infrastructure in Lviv, that's anti-war to support that?
Potentially, yeah. So what are the
potentially?
Wait. Okay. So anti-war movements of the past, for example, in World War II, they viewed, the Allies' war effort to stop the Nazis and the Japanese from waging war on other people. Like, they billed that as anti-war. Now, that is the distinction between, being anti-war and being a pacifist. So in this way, hold on, let me finish. In the same way, Russia trying to stop Ukraine's war in the Donbass is anti-war.
The Russians started the war in the Donbass. They invaded Crimea and then supplied Donbass rebels, many of which, by the way, were just Russian fucking soldiers, right? They are a belligerent in the war. They're not trying to stop it. They're one of the belligerents that caused it in the first place. This is like, we invade Iraq, and then like month 2 or month 3, we say we're in Iraq to stop the war in Iraq. What do you mean? You invaded Iraq. The reason the war's happening is because you invaded.
That's the argument people are making.
Well, that's an incoherent, nonsensical argument, and that's actually not what the anti-war argument in the United States.
I just gave you a historical example of this
in World War II. I mean, I just did. I mean, people can go look up my Substack if they're interested from last fall.
No one reads your Substack. No one reads
Well,
it.
I don't know. I have probably more subscribers than you've ever had, so I guess some people read it.
Oh Jesus!
You definitely don't. But anyways,
So, I mean, so if nobody reads or listens to anything I do,
Dude, I hope I love it. I love these two slap fighting. It's fantastic. It's the best entertainment I've had all week. Great way to end the week.
why were you so desperate to want to debate me on Twitter Spaces? It seems odd. Also sending me creepy DMs about like
creepy
how
DMs.
I'm lonely on Valentine's Day.
Lonely on Valentine's
well,
Day.
everyone knows you were drunk tweeting when you did that, and that's why you tweeted out something.
No, I was inebriated. You're drunk on some side kind of ideological, intoxicant. I don't know what it is.
Yes,
exactly,
I'm drunk on that.
Something potent. So maybe I can get a sip of that. It might actually be a fun time. In World War II,
yes.
I mean, well, actually, lots of people read this particular article because there was a giant flurry of discussion around it. So
yeah, you were watching Japan's crimes in Asia. I remember that stuff.
Maybe you were.
Dog, this is just a 2v1. Why the fuck is Samira Khan in here? She contributes nothing to any conversation ever. Does she like simp post about the Taliban all the time and about women being involved in politics? Like, why is she, like, if she doesn't think women should be like running for president or being involved in politics, why is she even here? Why is she even talking? I don't understand why she's like, why? She's not moderating. She's just getting in the debate. She's just debating.
Too busy kind of, kissing your own ass
Michael,
on YouTube or something. You didn't have time to read it. That's fine.
And you're jumping around the conversation. But my question still
no, hold on. Let me respond to what Samira said. Hold on. Let me respond to what Samira just asked me. In World War II, I mean, prior to December of 1941, when the U.S. formally entered the war post Pearl Harbor, the anti-war movement in the United States, as embodied mainly by the America First coalition, but also other groups, which was a cross-ideological movement, they were principally...
Dude, the thing is, I've been in Jackson Hinkle's shoes, not ideologically, but when talking to Michael Tracey, where you're sitting there and each word he says is, when we talk about the war in America against social justice, it's like, oh my God, get to the point. And he just keeps going and going and going. And so I'm getting joy out of just knowing that frustration he's feeling right now.
Against U.S. involvement in the war. That was what they were anti. That was what they, obviously there was disagreement among certain individuals as to whose war effort, whether they were in favor of certain other aspects of the warfare that was underway then in Europe. But they were not saying we want to enter the war for anti-war purposes. They were for keeping the United States out of the war. That was what the whole point of the anti-war movement was in 1941. Okay, so no, it's just historically inaccurate to say that the anti-war movement was all about trying to get the United States into the war in World War II. No,
I'm talking about global anti-war movement at the time, not specific to the United States. And in the same way,
by the way, the anti-war movement in the United States during World War II, I don't know if any of you guys have seen them, right? But like seen the people like, what has Hitler done to us? Like that's the anti-war movement, World War II, right? So the anti-war movement would be, unironically, more like Michael Tracey, right? More like, hey, it's not our business. That's their stuff. This is our stuff. Like, we should not be getting involved. That's the anti-war movement, right? During World War II, right? So if Samira Khan can acknowledge that's the anti-war movement, I don't see how we can twist that into, oh, the pro-war the anti-war movement now is invading another country, bombing its cities, launching missile strikes here, there, and everywhere, trying to annex territory, masses of war crime. Like, it just doesn't add up. It's just, like, if she can acknowledge that that was the anti-war movement, because if the fact is, the pro-war movement, the anti-war movement is just whatever is right, whatever's the right side of the conflict, which is what this feels like right now, or whatever is defensive in nature, then that means that it was anti-war for us to declare war on Japan. Because Japan struck Pearl Harbor, therefore it was anti-war to declare war on them. Do you know how silly that is? You know how little sense that makes? That it's anti-war to declare war on Japan? It doesn't make any sense. This doesn't hold up against any opposition. Oh, and just like there was a foreign contingent to this event, when it comes to Russian support, Russian money, people who backed the Russian position here, there was also the German-American Bund in the lead up to World War II, as I guess a comparison.
Jackson, people who are speaking at the Rage Against the War Machine rally, they don't want any U.S. involvement in this war.
Right. So they don't
saying America shouldn't get involved is not being anti-war, because the world exists out of America. If I said I want Azerbaijan to invade Armenia to reclaim the rightful territory of Karabakh, that's not my position, by the way, just making up a position. That isn't anti-war because I live in the United States. That's still pro-war. I'm advocating for a war.
Necessarily favor a cessation of the hostilities. They just
and wait,
favor the United States not being.
No. I gotta respond to that. I gotta respond to that. So that's exactly where you're wrong, because every single person who supports Russia does want this to end. No one wants more.
If you ask everyone about any war at all, they're always going to say, I want this war to end, of course. If you asked, you could walk up to Adolf Hitler and ask, do you want this war to end? And he'll probably say, yes. Once our terms of Lebensraum and complete conquest and domination have been done, of course, I don't want our German Volk to die. Like, you could find the most war-hungry world leaders in history, and you talk to them, and they're going to tell you they're anti-war, but the terms right now are just unacceptable. Like, come on, man. And if you were to ask most Ukrainians, yeah, the people on the other side, the receiving end of the Russian invasion, what they think, the majority of them want the war to end, yes, but they don't want the war to end with the territory being taken away. Everyone wants the war to end, man. It's ridiculous to think, oh, the other side just wants the war to go on forever. Maybe there's like a few American like neocons who are like, maybe and callously we're calculating this, but the vast majority of people on both sides of the war want the war to end. They just want the war to end on their terms, and it was the Russians who started the war. It's their fault. They're the invaders. This is all just getting rather silly. We'll give this like maybe 10 more minutes, but then we're gonna stop this because like we're not moving anywhere forward. We're just kind of looping a little bit here.
Russians to continue going out and getting slaughtered, more innocent Ukrainians that probably are either neutral or may even support Russia's aims in this, go out and get slaughtered for, they're sending out 16-year-old kids at this point. It's insane. They're sending out disabled people, it's insane what they're doing.
Dude, he's not providing evidence for any of this. Michael Tracey's not going to push back on that. Oh, really? Can you give me evidence of the 16-year-old kids? Can you give me evidence? He's not going to give him any evidence. He's not going to ask him because Michael Tracey's not pushing.
So no one supports that. And
also, I like how he said, like, when he described all the civilians that died, this was his description. Russian soldiers, neutral Ukrainians, and Russian supporting Ukrainians who are all getting slaughtered. It's like in his mind, the idea of a Russian committing a war crime or Russia striking a town or village and killing a Ukrainian civilian, when we all know the vast majority of Ukrainians from all polling available shows that they vast majority support the resistance against Russia, and like all of his descriptions of the casualties are all like, oh, it was a Russian babushka and great Russian soldiers and Russian patriots and Russia this, Russia that. Like the idea of like Ukrainian casualty, it's like kind of swept under the rug there and how he describes the conflict.
And I think that's where we really truly do have a fundamental misunderstanding between each other, because I don't support that. You say that I support Russia and their like continued war efforts. The efforts of Russia.
Well, you do, right?
The efforts of Russia are to stop the war. If the
they started the war, they expanded the war. Now, in their mind, they're going to end the war by winning the war, but they're nowhere close to winning the war. The easiest way to stop the war would be for them to fucking leave. Like, do you think, like, when we're talking about Vietnam, it feels like everybody in the world kind of knew, like, the easiest way for this to end is the Americans leave, right? Feels like everybody kind of could clearly see that picture, right? But this is the special war where actually the natives have to surrender themselves, and the invading army, which is getting their ass handed to them, and it was supposed to be the second most powerful in the military in the world, but can't conquer a nation with an interconnected highway system. They have to just be given land because the world will explode if not. Like, come on, man.
Efforts of Russia. If the efforts of Russia, I don't know why you're laughing. If the efforts of Russia were
because what you said was silly.
War, why would Putin have put forward
multiple peace proposals that were nuked by the West, in particular.
What were the peace proposals? What were the peace proposals? What were the details of them? And do you think they were fair to the Ukrainians after you describe the details? He's not going to go into the details, because if you listen to the Russian peace proposals that they've made publicly from the data that we do have, you know what they demand? They demand a recognition of the annexation of Crimea, Kherson, Zaporozhye, Luhansk, and Donetsk, the demilitarization of Ukraine, and a changing of the Ukrainian government, as well as a guarantee of neutrality. As in, Ukraine can't join, after demilitarizing themselves, they can't join any defensive agreements to make sure they don't get invaded. Basically, they completely remove any ability for them to resist the Russians in the future. Yeah, that's a peace proposal, but nobody's going to accept it. Right? The same way that if I go into a art studio, like an art bidding place, you know, one of those places they bid on art, and I put a penny down, yeah, I made a proposal, but no one's going to accept it for good reason.
By Boris Johnson and nuked by Biden officials. We've seen this from former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett admitted this, that Russia was close to finalizing a peace proposal with the Ukrainians, and then Biden officials stepped in and nuked the deal. We saw this also with Turkey in the Istanbul negotiations. Putin was close to achieving a deal there, and Boris Johnson came in and stopped the deal from taking place. Those are the only two that we know about for sure publicly that were close to taking place and then stopped. So Russia wants this to end. The only reason why they're doing what they're doing still today is because the West has nuked every opportunity of peace.
I love this. Like, they want this to end. They're so desperate for this to end. Mobilize an extra 200,000 people to send to the front. Draft more prisoners. Like, come on.
Even
poor Russia. They were just forced to invade that nation with hundreds of thousands of troops. Oh, poor them.
Start of this war. So it's really crazy that, you know, you would claim that we support more death, more destruction here, when that couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, I'm laughing because it's uncanny how perfectly this echoes the same sort of fallacious logic that the pro-Ukraine U.S. side.
Dog, stop looking like such dog water in this debate, Michael, and then being like, this is just as ridiculous as the Ukrainians. The reason that you're getting dragged by somebody making nonsensical arguments, that you can even identify the nonsense in their arguments and still end up performing not that well, is because you're fence sitting. You're fence sitting too hard. Whatever.
And just justifying its own warfare. They'll say, of course we want the war to end. We're not sending Abrams tanks or heavy artillery or Bradley fighting vehicles because we want...
Let me be clear. My position is I want the Ukrainians to win the war on their terms, because that's what the majority of Ukrainians want, and I think that would be the fair outcome that would guarantee Ukrainian stability for a longer period of time, Ukrainian stability and prosperity. That's my position, right? If you would ask Michael Tracey his position, it would take him 3 hours to tell you that he's neutral. So that's the main problem with why Michael Tracey's not performing so well here.
Want to perpetuate the warfare. This is all about ending the warfare because we want to stop the death and destruction. That's why
they're not negotiating.
Escalating the warfare. I mean, it's the same exact argument. That's
it's not because
so eerily reminiscent.
Michael, it's not the same because they're not.
I mean, you're saying no warring party says that it wants to wage war just for its own sake.
How could you say?
It's all about at least putatively bringing a resolution.
The free market of ideas.
Because how could you say that this is the same when we all know how this is? We all know
the logic is the same.
No. We all know how this is going to end. Point A, Russia's going to have a military victory, or there's going to be mutually assured destruction. And point B, also, the Ukrainians are not attempting to negotiate.
Wait, what did he say? 36. Sorry, I didn't hear what he said. He said something about mutually assured destruction.
And Boris Johnson, Michael, this is the same.
Here it is.
When we all know how this is. We all know
the logic is the same.
No, we all know how this is going to end.
By the way, I am not going to hear Jackson fucking Hinkle, after so definitively saying that the Russians are not going to invade, and then they invade, tell anyone that he knows how this is going to end. You don't know shit. You don't know shit about anything. Same thing with Bucha. He get it wrong time and time and time and time again. You can't come out and then make predictions and expect anybody to respect them. Why is it always that the people that are the most wrong on Ukraine are the ones that are most fervently assertive that you should listen to them and they know what's going to happen? They can predict the future.
A, Russia's going to have a military victory, or there's going to be mutually assured destruction.
Listen, and by the way, he knows how this is going to end, and there's only two scenarios. It's A, Russia wins, or B, everyone dies. But if anybody said this before this war, they would laugh in your face. But these people have normalized this idiocy. Either we win or everyone dies. That's the two outcomes. We win, the Russians win, they conquer Ukraine, get as much land as they want, have all their terms seceded to, or everyone dies. This is like, it's like throwing the toys out the toy box if you lose, but you're just doing it on a global scale with all of humanity. It's ridiculous. This is like childlike logic. Exactly, Zepson.
And point B also, the Ukrainians are not attempting to negotiate. Zelensky's come out and he said, I will only negotiate if Putin steps down. I will only negotiate if...
That demand has been seceded. As far as I know, the demand has been reeled in. And then after reeling, because America was like, that's not a smart move, even though that's popular with your domestic base, he reeled that demand in and then put out a 10-point peace plan, which included reparations, the returning of Ukrainian land. He put that out publicly. I actually have a video about it on my second channel, DylanBurnsLIVE, about Zelensky's peace plan, which he proposed. So he is willing to put out a peace proposal. But what Zelensky's saying is that, oh, Jackson, the Ukrainians aren't willing to sit down right now with the Russians and hammer out a peace plan. That's because no peace plan could be hammered out. Because listen to Jackson. He's the person who's like, hammer out the peace plan. But what would Jackson's peace plan be? Ukraine having half of its land carved out and given to the Russians, not being able to hold a standing military, the demilitarization of Ukraine. They are not allowed to join any alliances, so as they give up all their weapons, they have no one to protect them, allowing the Russians to probably just invade them again in 5 and 10 years and finish the fucking job. Yeah, no wonder the Ukrainians don't want to sit in a room with somebody telling them that nonsense and respect it with a hearing. Once the sides are more able to come to terms that are actually, you know, reconcilable, then we can have peace negotiations. Outside of that, it's literally pointless jibber jabber.
Every Russian troop leaves the 100,000 plus square kilometers that they've already liberated. I will only negotiate, thirdly, if the Russians give back Crimea, which voted to join the Russian Federation back in 2014. So how
they didn't vote. I mean, again, they put guns in the face of Ukrainian politicians, made them dissolve the government, and then had a rigged referendum. But Jackson Hinkle has never been one to care about, you know, election security in any way. So, I mean, big surprise. I mean, he also believes that the votes in the more recent votes in 2022 and all the occupied territory that were organized in a week, that had a very small percentage of the population participate, and none of the displaced people voting, and was also very clearly had instances of ballot stuffing and voter intimidation, that was perfectly valid. That you can organize a democratic referendum in a war zone, not include any of the displaced people who are going to be primarily people who are more friendly to the Ukrainian government that have been displaced, and that's fair. And you can stuff your ballots, don't worry about it. Come on, man. And right there, when it comes to that, I think Jackson Hinkle isn't dumb enough to actually believe that. That I just think is grifting. I think I think that's grifting. I think maybe he is dumb enough. I don't think he is to believe that.
How could you say that this is the same when the Ukrainians are not trying to actually negotiate? And the only times that they did, on 2 occasions, the West came in and stopped them from finalizing the deal. It's not the same at all.
First off, 99% of the time that I ever cover this topic, it's highlighting those things that you mentioned. I mean, I read that.
Yeah, it sounds like his neutral position seems to be having a Russia tint, and it's part of the reason why Michael can't push back on anything Jackson says, because he doesn't have the tool in the tool belt to have this conversation. Even though this conversation should be really fucking easy.
Presidential decree that Zelensky authored and published in September, where he said that no negotiations were possible with the Russian Federation so long as Putin remains in office, which is essentially stating that a precondition of any negotiations is regime change in Russia, hence negating the viability of any negotiations whatsoever. And with the U.S. saying that...
You're very smart, Michael. Back up Jackson. Yes, back up Jackson. So then when he turns back to him, instead of Jackson giving you credit, he's going to say, exactly, and this, and then continue to argue against you. Yeah, very smart, Michael. Treating him like a good faith actor. Very smart, Michael.
Zelensky and the Ukrainian government are somehow dictating the strategic policy of the war effort that, you know, is a de facto endorsement of regime change by the U.S. I'm aware of a diplomatic history. I know about what Naftali Bennett said. I transcribed it myself. I mean, you're not telling me anything new.
I know.
I'm simply trying to remain consistent.
I'm simply trying to put it in context for you,
saying that whatever might be true about the Ukraine war effort and the U.S. war effort. I mean, I think that the logic that the U.S. employs in justifying its own war effort as somehow anti-war, which they do constantly. That's what Ukraine partisans do, and American interventionists do all the time. They're saying the Abrams tanks are actually anti-war vehicles. That's what they say. And yet
the weapons are being sent to help Ukraine win the war and defend against the invasion, right? I mean, they're helping the Ukrainian war effort. So, I mean, that's how you describe it. I think we should send the Abrams tanks. I don't think the Abrams tanks are necessarily the best tanks to be sending them. I think we should be working with the Europeans to send more Leopards, stuff like that. But I'm for it.
Yeah. Not saying that everything about the Russian war effort is, quote, the same, but there is an eerily uncanny reminiscence of the fallacious logic employed, where you're saying that, oh, actually, you know, we're bombing the electrical infrastructure in Lviv and in Kiev and Kharkiv and so forth because it's for anti-war purposes. So the bombs, you know, the bombs being dropped on those electrical grids, they have like a dove painted on them or something. I mean, it's just...
See, hey, this is the first point he's actually bringing against him. Okay, what is the anti-war purpose of bombing Lviv's electrical infrastructure? There you go. And wait, let me think. Is Jackson Hinkle... okay, the one thing he could respond with, I think, would be like production facilities. Let's see if he goes there.
Total absurdity. Now, again, I would be fine,
no
and
response.
I wish almost you would do this, because then we could have a more reasoned debate. I wish you would just make an argument that it's a just war, so that these warfare methods employed by Russia are justifiable in your telling.
It's not a just war.
It's not a just war. Okay, no. Well, that's interesting.
No,
you're saying Russia's war effort is not just.
No, the West's war in Ukraine is not.
The West's war in Ukraine. Okay, there's NATO soldiers aren't occupying Ukrainian towns. Russian soldiers are. Anybody with two eyes can see whose war this is. We didn't start the fire, you know? I mean, it's pretty obvious.
Not a just war.
Well, I'm not talking about the West's war effort in Ukraine. That's another issue.
War is peace, freedom, and slavery.
Russia's not waging a war. It's a defense.
Wait, so it's not dropping bombs on stuff?
No, I think it's a special military operation to protect.
It's a war. It's a war. This is just like, I need my preferred words for it. You can't call it a war. You got to call it this other thing that's desensitized. You know what this sounds like? It's not torture. It's enhanced interrogation. Come on. Hey, Counterpoints, thanks for the raid of 27. Welcome, everybody. We're watching the most fantastic Michael Tracey debate, the most intellectually honest man, Jackson Hinkle.
That's a total nonsensical just wordplay trick.
Okay, no, it's not. It's not. Michael, let me ask you a question.
It is.
Was it Stalin's war in World War II when they were protecting Jews, Poles, and Soviets that were being slaughtered?
I don't know what you mean by...
Wait, okay, Stalin didn't protect the Poles. He did mass deportation of the Poles. Not to mention, when the Warsaw Uprising happened, he just kind of held back, or whatever. I don't want to get into specific World War II. But the Stalin did not protect Poland. He split up Poland with the Nazis.
Stalin's war.
He could have not endorsed the Nazi invasion and not worked with them to invade Poland. He could have done that. I mean, the Poles had a defensive plan. I don't know if it would have worked. The odds were against them, but that plan was destroyed, and it made it so less German soldiers died, less German equipment was used up, and they were able to use those men and that equipment to invade the French, invade the Netherlands, invade Denmark, invade Belgium, invade Luxembourg, take all these countries, establish Vichy France, invade Greece, all these other countries. All this fighting and fucking Africa before it turned around and it bit the Soviet Union in the ass.
Stalin had a war effort.
Well, you're saying that this is
Britain had a war effort.
I like that in Jackson's mind, the Soviets invading Poland with the Nazis is the Soviets defending Poles. Even though after they took that land, what was the first thing he did? Started arresting people, started deporting people out of Poland, mass deportations. I mean, come on, man. He wasn't protecting anything. He was splitting up land. It was imperial land grab. At least it acted that way. That's how Poles think about it. They cut it up. They cut up Poland with the Nazis.
What?
You're saying that this is Putin's war.
I didn't say that. I said
it's not just, I mean, it's partially Putin's war, but it's Russia's war. It's Russia's war. When we say it's Putin's war, we're isolating the blame onto one man, when the structures in place to carry out this war have been there for a while. And the ideology, too.
Russia is undertaking a war effort in Ukraine, is it not? I mean, who dropped the bombs within the past 12 hours on electrical infrastructure in Lviv?
Of course Russia did, and I think it's great that they did that.
That's a war method, right? That's
by the way,
activity
again,
that Russia...
He just said, did he say it's great that they did that? That it's great that they attacked Ukrainian civilian electrical infrastructure?
On electrical infrastructure in Lviv.
Of course Russia did, and I think it's great that they did that.
Yeah, he endorsed it. He endorsed the bombing of electrical infrastructure. Hey, fantastic. That guy, this is the guy who cares about Ukrainians, though. He cares about Ukrainians, so during winter, bomb electrical infrastructure and the ability for Ukrainians to heat themselves. That's a good thing when you care about civilian casualties. Totally cares, man. Totally cares.
Method, right? That's activity.
I swear, the Russian government could order the execution of all men over the age of 18 in villages occupied, and he would find some way to like weasel around to defend it as an anti-war passive, fantastic position.
Activity that Russia undertook pursuant to
it's a military operation.
What's the freaking difference? It's a euphemism. It's a euphemism that is in keeping with how Russian state officials characterize their war effort. I'm not sure why you're so insistent on maintaining that euphemism.
The reason why I'm insistent on maintaining that euphemism, as you put it...
So you agree it's a euphemism?
No, I'm saying that as you put it is a euphemism. Okay. If you let me finish my fucking sentence, then I'll finish my point.
I mean, denying that this is a war or that the Russians invaded Ukraine, I mean, this is just denial of reality. I don't know. You can't listen to this and then come away with thinking Jackson Hinkle's a respectable man. He's honest with me. He engaged in good faith. If he can't even say the Russians invaded Ukraine, there's no difference between this guy and him, Judy and Avatar. There is no war in Ba Sing Se. There's no difference. He's gonna fucking take Jackson Hinkle after this talk ended, after this Twitter space ended. He fucking took Michael Tracey to Lake Lao Guide for some re-education.
The reason why, well, I'm sure many more people are riveted by what I have to say than what you have to say because more people actually care about what I have to say. But the reason why I think that
to a straw poll.
Dude, man, you could build dams and bridges and many roads with the size of the ego of Jackson Hinkle, man. He really loves himself, doesn't he? Probably loves himself every night.
The reason why I say that is because in times of war, we all have to understand that there are defensive responses that take a military tone to them, and then there's outright, war crimes, aggression, invasion, hostility that we see from other sides. So the character of the state of Nazi Germany and the character of their military was far different than the character of if you're going to take a piss or fill up water, like turn the mute.
Filling up water pile.
The character of the Nazi military in World War II was far different than the character of the Soviet Red Army in World War II, just in the same way that the defensive actions of Russia to stop World War III and further escalation against the 15,000 slaughtered in the Donbass and the attempted escalation to World War III.
By the way, he says the 15,000 slaughtered in the Donbass. He claims that is a number of civilians killed by the Ukrainian government. He doesn't know that number. He doesn't. I heard this a few times. Sometimes people say that was genocide. That number includes Ukrainian soldiers. That means he includes... and I already said this earlier, but I just want to double down on this because this is how you can easily find out when somebody's a hack. It's when they say this number. That includes Ukrainian soldiers, meaning that in Jackson Hinkle's death toll of innocent Donbass children killed by Ukrainian government includes Ukrainian soldiers, meaning the soldiers went in there and like shot themselves. Like how did that happen?
By NATO starting with Ukraine are different than the actions of NATO provoking Russia. They're different. You can't say that it's, Russia's war efforts when this is a response to the West starting a war on Russia's front doorstep.
Well, okay. By the
way, Russia's front doorstep. Can we talk about that? People seem to be under the impression that if something happens around Russia, that Russia just gets to say how it goes, right? If the idea is NATO is not allowed on Russia's front doorstep, or there could be no Western allied government, does that mean that, like, if Russia was to invade Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or possibly invade Finland to try to stop them from joining NATO, that would be justified? In fact, I remember Infrared saying that if Finland wanted to join NATO, that Russia should invade Finland, start more wars. Would it be an anti-war position, using this logic, for Russia to invade Finland to stop them from joining NATO? Or to invade Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, to free the people in those countries who speak Russian? Because guess what? A lot of them do. In fact, I've even heard some Russian state commentators talk about Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has a very large, not a very large, but a sizable Russian-speaking population on the border with Russia, because it's on the border with Russia. And Kazakhstan, even though it's part of Russia's military alliance structure, is not in favor of the invasion of Ukraine. They see it, as most nations of the world see it, as a barbaric invasion. They've even sent generators and aid to Ukraine. Not military, but humanitarian. And some commentators have responded to this with anger, especially since polling seems to indicate the majority of Kazakhs are not very supportive of the invasion. And some Russian commentators responded saying that maybe we need a special military operation in Kazakhstan to liberate those Russian-speaking peoples. Is it that anywhere anyone speaks Russian, Russia just has the permission to invade and conquer? And is anything that at all borders or is close to Russia just their free game to do whatever they want with? Because if that's true, then you could use that to justify the entirety of the Monroe Doctrine, which I'm pretty sure Jackson's against. So doesn't make any sense to me. Not one bit.
It's sort of just fatuous to say all these different war efforts throughout history are not, quote, the same. Of course, the Soviet war effort and the Nazi war effort in World War II were not the same in every respect. I'm not saying that. I don't know anyone who says that.
But you're making
respective war efforts cannot be evaluated. So I mean,
dog, why is she here? She's not. Does it need to be 2v1? Jackson's doing fine on his own, letting Michael just go for both and blabber on. Not to be mean to Michael, but I mean, it's somewhat acting, it's somewhat being like that. I mean, I understand it's not easy to talk to someone who's as incredibly bad faith as Jackson Hinkle, but he's got to make his statements more short and punchy.
One of the ironies there actually is that Germany made defensive arguments on its own behalf in World War II.
This is true. Hey, we're getting the train back on the tracks.
He was saying that it needed to come to the defense of ethnic Germans
Ukraine makes
in different jurisdictions. So I mean,
Ukraine does not make the argument that they need to invade Russia to defend ethnic Ukrainians. That argument was not made by the Ukrainians. That argument was made by the Russians in reverse, and by Adolf Hitler as he invaded Poland.
Almost always, warring parties make what they call defensive arguments in favor of their warfare. The U.S. has done it. Germany's done it. The Soviet Union's done it. Russia's doing it now. Ukraine's doing it now. So those defensive arguments are almost irrelevant in just coming to the basic ascertainment that they're still war efforts all the same. So when you're saying it's not Russia's war effort, I don't know what that means. Of course, Russia is waging a war effort right now. You can call it a special military operation and do these like euphemistic wordplay jujitsu tricks, I guess. Although they're not very.
That is true. That's Michael got to finally. He got a left hook in. There you go.
Persuasive, but when you're saying
Michael,
Russia has a war effort that can be evaluated on its own terms, you could think it's justified or not. You could think there's good arguments in favor of it or not. But to say that it's not Russia's war, I mean, that seems like it's almost like a broader political statement that's irrelevant to the point that they're waging war right now.
No, it's extremely relevant. And the reason why your take is extremely brain dead on this is because when you agree with Nathan J. Robinson that, just every leader, every government feels like they're battling absolute war and it's all the same, whether it's the U.S. in Afghanistan or Iraq, or the U.S. dropping napalm on civilians in Vietnam, or Putin, saying that he's taking on Nazis in Ukraine. You're saying that, it's like there's...
I like how every description of every other actor except Russia is like in the, like, they like bring up like justifiable, oh, these are justifiable criticism, bad things. Then it gets to Russia and it's like, and when Russia like saves a puppy out of a tree, people compare all these things. America slaughtering the Vietnamese and Russia saving puppies. But obviously I'm in favor of Russia saving puppies. It's just like, come on, man. You gotta get off your knees for Putin.
No, there's no differences to be made here. It's all war. But the reason why yes, that's exactly what you said.
I'm not saying everything is all the same. You keep ascribing this belief to me that I think everything is the same. I just never have said that.
Michael, shut your mouth. Let me finish. So the reason why so many were frustrated by what you said is because supporting Russia at this point in time is objectively anti-war because their whole aim is to bring an end to this. They don't want
oh my God, it's so stupid. The Ukrainian aim is to win and bring an end to the war. The Russian aim is to win and bring an end to the war. It's just that the end goal, what the end is on whose terms, is very differently between the two parties. This is silly.
This to continue. The West wants this to turn into a forever war. Maybe there's some within Russia that do want this.
The West is, okay. I am going to be honest with you. If you look at Western leaders and how they talk about this war, as much as people talk about, oh, they would love to drag Russia into the quagmire. And while geostrategically, you can probably make an argument from that from a very selfish type of just realpolitik like perspective, right? Just like, oh, we should just be doing this for that reason. Most Western defense analysts, most of the West that I've seen, have actually been kind of curling their hands, kind of like, should we send these tanks? Should we send these jets? Should we send this? Should we send that? And the reason they're making those calculations is they want to make the calculation like, will it even work, right? Because if the goal was just to catch Russia to quagmire, we would have given Ukraine everything we could right at the start. Right at the start, we would have shoveled it all in and be like, here's everything you can. If you guys want to do suicide bombings and all that, do everything you can. Just do whatever it is possible. But we've seen the West drag its feet every step of the way because as time went on, the conclusion didn't go from, oh, we can make this into a quagmire. Like, that was a big revelation. The revelation was, oh, shit, the Ukrainians have a shot. They can actually stop the Russians. Could they even win the war? And then the support came with it. There's a bunch of different reasons why people support wars. The reason why like, for example, if you go through the Russian nationalist community, you ask them, there's going to be different reasons people say they support the war. Some are going to say it's to stop the expansion of NATO. Some are going to say it's to, save the Russian speakers. Some are going to say it's to wipe out the disease of the mind that is Ukraineness, which is a quote from Dmitry Medvedev. It could be any number of reasons. There are probably people, and almost certainly people, definitely maybe in the defense industry or something, that would be interested in sending these weapons over because it undermines Russia. But that exists in every war. The French supported America, not because they loved American liberty. It was under a monarchy. The reason they sent that support was to undermine the British. That does not make the American struggle any less worthwhile.
To be a forever war.
Basically what I say, the reasons why people support sides in different conflicts are complex and divided.
Prigozhin of the Wagner group, maybe he's making so much money on this he wants to continue for a while. But I can definitively tell you that those within the Russian government that responded to the NATO aggression with the special military operation, based on their official statements, do not want this to continue forever, and based upon their actions since February 24th of last year.
Well, they don't want it to go on much longer because they're going to lose more troops, more men, and they're going to be in a worse position. And the longer this goes on, the less justifiable it is to its community, to its country, where the Ukrainians also want it to end, but they're willing to see it through to the end. All polling data seems to indicate that they have more of a will to fight than the Russians are on this. Like, there's no polling data that it comes even remotely close to the Ukrainian unity on this war compared to Russian unity. And I think that does, to some degree, scare the Russians.
In the various attempts at peace that were nuked by the West, they don't want this to continue. They want this to come to an end, and they're trying to do anything and everything within their power to end this war that was started by the West. That's why supporting Russia is anti-war.
They invaded. It can't be started by a party that didn't do any of the invading, didn't move any of the armies. We started a war. Dude, it's crazy that we started and perpetuate and do everything behind this war, like the big global puppet men, like, we're the puppeteers at the top. We've done all of that, but we've done it all without a single casualty. Truly, America's unstoppable in every way.
War.
It's a cliche to say things are Orwellian, but I have to admit, I struggled to come up with a better term for your nostrum.
All right, well...
supporting Russia's war effort is objectively anti-war. I mean, that's just amazing. I mean, I hope people listening have enough just basic objectivity or impartiality in just their mode of thinking that they can realize how just...
He doesn't push back. Dude, he just goes back to the main point, which I understand why. The main point is easy to make. You think that Russia invading another country is anti-war. That's silly. Everybody sees it's silly. Everybody sees it's stupid. Like, it's an easy point to hit on, but he's still allowing Jackson to get so many points through, which even if you walk away from this conversation, like, I think most people, if you would have showed this to most Americans, probably walk away with this conversation still thinking it's quite silly to think that Russia invading another country's anti-war. He's getting enough points through with zero pushback that it's still like Jackson comes out of this at least getting through his nonsense points, while Michael just was able to maybe establish alone that, well, at the very least, invading another country isn't anti-war. Like, he needs to push back against a lot of the substance of the points that Jackson's bringing up, whether it be the historical points or like the points about the coup, the points about this, the points about that. But it's just, he's just dragging it back to the main point over and over again. So Jackson gets to get out so much information that he gets to smear so much feces on the wall, and Michael has done none of the work to clean it up.
Bizarrely oxymoronic that is.
It's not just,
hold on, let me give you another example, and then maybe we'll open up to others. Okay, real quick. So in 1999, the U.S./NATO initiates a war in Serbia, right? Yugoslavia, also known as the Kosovo War.
I don't. If they're about to open it to this, I don't need to hear about the Yugoslav war. I think we've heard enough of this. This is 46 minutes 20 seconds. I can say that I don't think Michael Tracey. Well, what happened ended up being what I thought it would be. I thought Michael Tracey would kind of fence it, that he'd be very verbose, and that would undermine him. That ended up being true. I thought Jackson Hinkle would be dishonest. He was, and he defended an impossible to defend position by mostly not talking about the main point, but trying to scatter around to talk about everything else but the main point. Then advocating to invade another country is advocating for you're in favor of expanding this war, or advancing the war, or continuing the war, or invading another country. That's pro-war. And instead of having the conversation centered on, is it pro-war to advocate to invade other countries? Obviously, yes. They kind of pitter-pattered around the topic and moved on to the justifications behind Russia getting involved, while basically pretending that being pro-war, being anti-war, just means being in the right position, being morally correct, which that's not true. And let's wipe away all the facts about like what Jackson Hinkle lied about in this conversation, or about like the morality of the war. Wipe away all of the facts, and I'll just bring it back to this one comparison because I think it's the best comparison. Even if we were to say Jackson was right, that it was defensive in some nature, right? I don't think it is. But let's say that it was. Just because it is defensive in some nature does not necessarily mean that it isn't still a pro-war position to take. Even if I was to grant everything he said, which I don't, but let's do it for a moment. The comparison I used earlier. Was it the pro-war position to advocate for the declaration of war against Japan? My answer would be yes. Because you are voting in favor of going to war. Because you have made the determination that for a variety of reasons, it is a good thing to do to declare war on Japan, to go to war. You're pro going to war. Even if the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor, which then made our struggle defensive in nature, that doesn't mean it isn't pro-war to say, let's go to war with the Japanese. In fact, the Japanese were somewhat betting on the idea that we wouldn't go to war, that their blow at Pearl Harbor would be so decisive and so destructive that it would avoid a war. In fact, if we would have used Jackson Hinkle's logic here, Jackson Hinkle's logic, if equally applied, would mean that the Japanese were anti-war by bombing Pearl Harbor because they hoped by bombing Pearl Harbor, they would avoid a war altogether. It was pro-war of the Japanese to bomb an American port. It was also pro-war from the United States to endorse going war with Japan because of the strike on the United States. The question is whether the pro-war American position in that war was correct. I think it was. I think fighting the Japanese was correct. And instead of having that conversation, which would have been more substantive, instead we played 46 minutes of word games and Jackson Hinkle pretending that that if you're anti-war, that means you're good. That's the good position. This is very, very silly. What a silly debate. What a silly debate.